I still work in tower maintenance, but I will not climb the Bellwether site after dark anymore. The Forest Service removed that tower in 2019. The radio still checks in every single night, exactly at 11:47 p.m., on a frequency that was decommissioned in 1987. It uses a call sign that belongs to a station chief who disappeared in 1963. That should have been impossible. For months I tried to explain it away. I was wrong about every explanation. My name is David Calvert, and before I explain what I heard coming from beneath that limestone ridge, if stories like this are the reason you keep the lights on a little longer, subscribe and share this with someone who thinks they would have handled this differently than I did. I have been maintaining communications infrastructure across Appalachia for 23 years. Started as a tower climber in '98, worked my way up through equipment certification, and by 2015 I was managing 17 remote transmitter sites across southeastern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. That is a lot of territory. A lot of it is terrain that does not appear on civilian GPS and where a four-wheel drive can only take you so far. You walk the rest. The job requires you to understand radio frequencies the way a mechanic understands engines. You need to know which frequencies belong to which agencies, what the legal broadcast ranges are, how weather and geography affect signal strength, and what a healthy transmission should sound like versus one that is failing. You need to carry replacement parts you might never use, understand how to work a radio tower in conditions that should not allow climbing, and remain calm when you are 200 feet in the air during a thunderstorm because the emergency communication system for 3 counties is going down. That credibility matters for what I am about to describe, because the first person to hear something genuinely wrong with a transmission is usually the person who maintains it. And for almost 2 months, every experienced technician I knew had heard something they could not quite explain. Nobody wanted to report it. I was based out of a rental office in Harlan, Kentucky, but I covered sites from Pike County all the way northwest to the New River Gorge. That is rough country. Limestone karst throughout the entire region, with caves and sinkholes and underground water systems that nobody has completely mapped. The geology there can play tricks on radio propagation. Signals can skip in ways the models do not predict. That is why I accepted the first anomalies so easily. The landscape itself explains a lot. The Bellwether Tower was one of my regular sites. Located about 8 miles north of the town of Pennington, on a ridge that sits 700 feet above the Lavisa Fork River, built in 1952 as a fire lookout, converted to a communications relay in the 1960s. The tower itself was a 3-legged structure, 120 feet, with a small concrete equipment shed at the base. No permanent staff. I would climb it every 6 weeks to check the transmitter, inspect the cabling, test the signal output, and file a maintenance report. The surrounding forest was standard second-growth Appalachian hardwood. Oak, hickory, locust. The access road was a logging spur that had been paved once, maybe, and was now mostly gravel and washed-out shoulders. Cell service was non-existent. The nearest town with a diner was Pennington, which had a population of about 400 and a police department that consisted of 2 officers. Emergency services from there took about 30 minutes to reach the ridge. I was comfortable there. I knew the route. I knew what normal looked like. The first discrepancy came on March 15, 2021, during a routine climb. I was checking connections at the 90-foot mark when I heard a transmission on the primary frequency that did not match the scheduled maintenance window. Somebody was sending on our channel. The transmission was brief, just a series of numbers repeated twice, and then it stopped. No call sign, no identification, no response when I transmitted back. I assumed it was a skip from somewhere else. Signal refraction is common in karst terrain. A transmission from 50 miles away can bounce off the atmosphere wrong and land directly in your equipment. It happens. I noted it in my service log and did not think much about it until I got back to the office and pulled the frequency roster. That particular frequency channel had been retired in 1987. According to every database I could access, it had been idle for 34 years. I told my supervisor, Marcus Chen, about it that evening. He was the regional manager, 48 years old, good at his job, and not prone to exaggeration. His first reaction was to order a full inspection of our transmission equipment. He thought maybe there was a crosstalk issue, a loose cable somewhere creating a phantom signal. The inspection took 3 days. I found nothing wrong. Every cable was properly connected, every switch in the correct position, every frequency isolator functioning within specification. The equipment was clean. There were no corrosion problems, no loose connectors. It was all correct. The next transmission came 2 weeks later. Same frequency, same time as my last climb. Mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. This time I was not on the ridge. I was in the office. Marcus came in and asked me to listen to the recording. It was the same voice, if you could call it a voice. It sounded like human speech run through a degraded radio filter, words separated by irregular static. It was saying something that started with coordinates. I wrote down what I could make out. 33.02 north, 82.44 west. That was close to our location. Very close. Those coordinates placed the transmission source directly beneath the bellwether tower, or very close to it, straight down into the limestone. Marcus had the same thought I did. Neither of us said it out loud. We talked around it. He suggested maybe there was some kind of natural crystal formation underground that was resonating with our signal and creating a feedback pattern. He suggested mineral deposits that could act like a conductor. He suggested an old phone line or telegraph wire that had been buried decades ago and was picking up residual electromagnetic fields. We all knew those explanations did not really work, but we accepted them anyway, because the alternative required admitting something that did not have a sensible explanation. I went back to Bellwether Tower on April 2nd, 2021. I remember the date because I marked it in my personal journal. The weather was clear, temperatures in the low 50s, and the forest smelled like wet clay and early growth. I climbed the tower carrying the same equipment I always carried: portable spectrum analyzer, cable tester, voltmeter, replacement connectors, climbing gear. The climb itself was uneventful. No birds. It was mid-morning, which was odd for the absence of birds, but I did not think about that at the time. At the 60-foot mark, I positioned myself against the tower leg and used a handheld spectrum analyzer to scan the radio frequencies in real time. I was looking for any unauthorized transmissions, any crosstalk, any signs of equipment interference. The scan took about 8 minutes. As I was reviewing the results, a new transmission started. I heard it first as a digital chirp, the kind of tone that usually signals the beginning of a burst transmission, and then that same degraded voice, but this time much clearer. It said, 45 degrees below the zenith. And then nothing. I climbed down faster than I should have. Not panicked, but fast enough that the rope work was not careful. At the bottom I sat on the equipment shed for maybe 10 minutes, just breathing, looking at the forest. 45 degrees below the zenith would be pointing toward the horizon at a very specific angle. It was a direction, a specific bearing, towards something on the ground. I mapped it out that evening, using USGS topographic data. If the transmission was originating from approximately straight down, from those coordinates 33.02 north, 82.44 west, and the message 45 degrees below the zenith was actually a direction, then it was pointing toward a location southwest of the tower, roughly 2 miles away, deeper into the ridge system. That location was not on any accessible road. It was marked on the topographic map with several depression symbols, which indicated sinkholes, and there was a small notation, barely legible in the USGS data: Hellmouth Cave, surveyed 1987, access gated. I had never heard of it. The next morning I drove back toward Pennington and stopped at the Harlan County Library. They had microfilm of local newspapers dating back to the 1960s. I was not looking for anything specific. I was just trying to understand whether anything unusual had happened on that ridge. What I found instead was a reference to an incident in September 1963. The headline read, "Ranger missing from Forestry Station. Search continues for Chief Irvin Reese, 14 days without contact." Irvin Reese had been the chief ranger for the Bellwether Fire Lookout Station. According to the article, he had been on duty alone, as was standard. His relief ranger arrived for the changeover and found the station empty. No sign of struggle, no indication of an accident. Reese's personal effects were still there. His jacket, his logbooks, his meal rations. The ranger station door was locked from the inside, but Reese was gone. The search had lasted 3 weeks. They never found him. The official conclusion, according to a follow-up article from November, was that he had suffered a mental health crisis and left the area. There was speculation about suicide. The incident was considered closed. I photographed the microfilm articles and brought them back to my office. Marcus was at his desk when I arrived. I put the printouts in front of him without saying anything. He read them and his expression did not change. He set them down and looked at me. "Where are you going with this?" he asked. "I want to know if there is any connection," I said, "between a missing ranger and a radio transmission that should not exist." "There is no connection," Marcus said. "That was 60 years ago. Equipment fails, radio signals propagate in ways we cannot always predict. Irvin Reese had a mental health crisis and abandoned his post. Those are 3 separate events. The transmission used his call sign," I said. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the parking lot for a long time. "I am telling you not to investigate this further," he said. "Not as an employee, not officially, not unofficially. I am telling you this because I value your safety and I value the relationship this office has maintained with the Forest Service for 20 years. the Forest Service must be aware of. The Forest Service removed that tower, Marcus interrupted. In 2019, 3 years ago, they removed it because of radiation concerns. They said the equipment was giving off readings that were slightly elevated. They said it was aging equipment emitting harmonic frequencies. And then they took the whole structure down, filled in the foundation, and declared the site decommissioned. I did not know that. The decommissioning of a tower was usually my responsibility. I would have been informed. I would have been there. Why was I not involved in the removal? I asked. You were on medical leave, Marcus said. January through March 2019. You had the knee surgery. By the time you came back it was done. That was true. I had torn my ACL in a climbing accident and spent 3 months recovering. When I returned to work I had been reassigned to different sites for about 6 months while I regained mobility. I still monitor the decommissioned sites, I said. It is part of my quarterly rounds. I should have been notified about the removal. Marcus turned back to me. His expression was careful, neutral. You were notified, he said. There is a memo in your file from March 2019, regarding the Bellwether site status change. You may not remember it because you were on pain medication. We all assumed you had read it. I did not remember that memo. But Marcus was right. I had been on strong painkillers, and I had missed some work communications during that period. It was plausible that I had forgotten. I want to go look at the site, I said, just to confirm the tower is actually gone. Marcus sat back down at his desk. He opened a drawer and removed a piece of paper. He slid it across to me. It was a memo. The header was from the Forest Service, dated March 8, 2019. It confirmed that the Bellwether site had been decommissioned, the tower removed, and all equipment secured or destroyed. There was a note from Marcus, added in handwriting, saying he had informed me of the status change. I had no memory of that memo or that conversation, but the evidence suggested it had happened. The site is closed, Marcus said. Access is restricted. There is no legitimate reason for you to climb a tower that no longer exists. I did not argue. I nodded and left his office. But over the next 3 days I kept listening to our recorded transmissions. I played them back several times. The voice using Irvin Reese's call sign was not an old recording. It was using specific radio protocol that had been updated in the 1980s, decades after Reese disappeared. Someone, or something, was transmitting on a dead frequency, using a dead ranger's identification, and pointing toward an underground location. I made a decision that I should not have made. On April 10, 2021, I drove back to the Bellwether site. The tower was actually gone. I had expected that, but seeing the empty ridge was different from knowing it. The concrete foundation had been filled in with gravel. There was a no trespassing sign attached to a chain-link fence that had been installed around the perimeter. The equipment shed was still there, but padlocked. Yellow inspection stickers on the fence indicated the site had been cleared by whatever government agencies required clearance. I did not go past the fence. I did not try to open the shed. I stood at the fence line and looked at where the tower had been, and I listened to the forest. The forest was very quiet. No birds, no insects, just wind through the trees and the distant sound of water, the river in the valley below. That absence of animal sound had bothered me before. I had not consciously registered it until that moment. I took photographs of the site. I do not know why. I had no plan to do anything with them. Then I drove down the ridge road and found the marking for the old logging spur that led toward Hellmouth Cave. The spur was overgrown. Trees had grown across it, and erosion had cut gullies that would have been difficult for most vehicles. I could have driven a truck through it, but I had a standard sedan, and I wanted to remain inconspicuous. I parked the car at the edge of the spur and walked. It took me 45 minutes to reach the cave entrance. The GPS coordinates I had written down from the transmission, 33.02 north, 82.44 west, placed me approximately 200 yards from where the mouth of the cave should be. The forest was thick, old-growth oak and hemlock, with rhododendron thickets that made movement slow. The ground was damp even though it had not rained in 2 days. That damp ground eventually became actual water, a small stream running downhill, and I followed it to its source. The cave entrance was partially collapsed. There had been a gate installed at some point, decades ago by the look of it, but the gate was rusted open and overgrown with moss and roots. The cave mouth itself was about 15 feet wide at the opening, narrowing to a low crawlway space near the top. There was no light visible from inside. Just darkness, and the sound of water echoing from somewhere deep below. The air coming out of the cave was cool and slightly metallic, not like normal cave air, which usually smells like mineral dust and earth. This smelled like batteries, like ozone, like something with electronics running. I did not go inside. I wanted to, but I had no flashlight, no rope, and no way to justify being there if a ranger happened by. I photographed the entrance, noted the GPS coordinates using my handheld unit, and walked back to my car. That evening I called Marcus at home. He was not happy. "You went to Hellmouth," he said. Not a question. "How did you know?" I asked. "Because I got a phone call from the Forest Service asking why a communications contractor was trespassing at a restricted site. They have cameras up in the ridge system. They monitor decommissioned sites." "David, you have put me in a very difficult position." I felt the weight of that. Marcus had given me the benefit of the doubt, but I had ignored his instruction and his warning. "I found something," I said. "Marcus, there is a cave entrance about 2 miles from where the tower was. And the transmissions we have been receiving are coming from inside that cave. I am certain of it." There was a long silence. Marcus was breathing, but he was not speaking. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said. "You are going to stop investigating the Bellwether site. You are going to stop going anywhere near Hellmouth Cave. And you are going to come into the office tomorrow and sign a statement saying that you were not at that location today. Do you understand? The transmissions are not your concern," Marcus said. "They are not our jurisdiction. They belong to whatever agency installed the equipment." "What equipment?" I asked. "What is in that cave?" Marcus hung up. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my apartment in Harlan and replayed every conversation with Marcus, every memo, every piece of information I had been given about Bellwether Tower. The decommissioning in 2019, while I was recovering from surgery. The careful explanation that I must have forgotten about the memo. The immediate acknowledgement by the Forest Service when I had visited the site. The cameras monitoring the area. The Forest Service did not install communication relay equipment in caves. They did not monitor decommissioned sites with cameras unless there was something worth protecting. And they definitely did not install equipment that broadcast on frequencies that had been officially retired for decades. The next morning, I did not go to the office. I called Marcus and told him I was taking personal leave. He did not argue. He simply said, "That is advisable," and ended the call. I spent the next week researching. I went back to the library and expanded my search. I looked for any incident reports, any accident records, any reference to unusual activity on that ridge system dating back to the 1950s. The deeper I dug, the more I found evidence that something had been happening there, and then the evidence simply stopped. In 1962 there had been construction reports related to government communications infrastructure on the ridge. Those reports were redacted, all identifying information removed. Who had ordered the construction, what they had built, where it was located, all of it was classified. In 1963 Irvin Reese disappeared. In 1976 there was a brief mention in a local news article about military communications testing in the region. Again redacted. Again no details. In 1987, the frequency that the transmissions were using was officially decommissioned. That same year the Hellmouth Cave system was surveyed by the USGS. The survey data was incomplete and closed to public access. And in 2019 the tower was removed. Radiation concerns, aging equipment, decommissioned. Then, 2 years later, someone was transmitting from beneath the earth using the call sign of a ranger who had disappeared 58 years earlier. I made a list. I know I should not have, but I did. Irvin Reese's call sign was Ranger 7. Every transmission I had logged used that same identification. Every transmission was on that same dead frequency. Every transmission included coordinates or directions or brief numeric sequences that did not match any standard radio protocol I knew. And every transmission seemed to be waiting for an answer. On April 18th, I drove back toward Bellwether Ridge. I did not go to the tower site. I went directly to Hellmouth Cave. This time I was prepared. I had a flashlight, a portable radio, water, a first aid kit, and a map of the cave system that I had been able to access through the Cave Conservation Society database. The map was incomplete. Surveys from 1987 always are. But it gave me a basic sense of the passage structure. I also brought a handheld radio receiver, tuned to the frequency that the transmissions were using. I wanted to see if I could get a stronger signal closer to the cave entrance. The walk-in was easier this time because I knew the route. The stream was still running, still clear water over limestone rocks. The cave mouth was the same, partially collapsed, dark, promising depths I could not see. At the entrance I turned on the radio receiver and slowly turned the frequency adjustment. At 147.32 MHz, the dead frequency, the receiver lit up. There was constant carrier noise, a steady signal like someone had left a transmitter running continuously. Not silent, not off. Just broadcasting static to anyone listening on that channel. I switched on the flashlight and looked into the cave. The passage sloped downward at a steep angle, disappearing into darkness after about 30 feet. The water was flowing into the cave, which meant the cave was functioning as a drainage system. The floor was smooth limestone, worn by water and time. There were small calcite formations on the ceiling, and in several places I could see hand-cut marks on the rock face. Not ancient marks, modern work. Metal had been used on these rocks, repeatedly, over time. I stepped into the cave. The air was colder. The humidity was much higher. My flashlight beam was absorbed by darkness, but I could see clearly enough to navigate. The passage continued downward, and after about 50 yards it opened into a larger chamber. This chamber was roughly 50 feet across and 30 feet high at the peak. Water ran through the center, forming a small stream that collected in a pool before draining away through a lower passage. And on the eastern wall of that chamber there was an opening. A regular rectangular opening, like a door or a hatch that had been carved into the rock. Even before I got close, I could see that it was not natural. The edges were precise, the frame was metal, old metal, oxidized and rust-stained, but definitely metal, and there was equipment inside. I could see the edge of what looked like a transmitter cabinet, and cable runs coming out of the opening, running along the cave floor toward the pool. The radio receiver in my hand began to produce a different sound, a tone, regular, like a pulse, like a heartbeat, like something had detected my presence and was acknowledging me. That was when I heard the vehicle engine on the ridge above. I did not think. I simply turned around and walked back toward the cave entrance. I moved quickly but carefully, because falling on limestone in the dark is how people get trapped in caves. I was out of the passage in less than 3 minutes. Outside, I turned off my flashlight and moved into the trees. A Forest Service truck was parked on the logging spur, about 100 yards from the cave entrance. 2 officers were standing near the truck, looking at the forest like they were trying to locate something. One of them was carrying a radio. I backed away slowly, keeping to the densest part of the rhododendron thicket. The trees were thick enough that I was completely hidden, and the officers were not looking in my direction. They were looking toward the cave mouth, as if they expected something to emerge. After what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, one of the officers spoke into the radio. I could not hear the words. He listened to the response, then both officers got back in the truck and drove back up the ridge toward the main road. I waited another 15 minutes before I moved. When I finally felt safe, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove down the mountain. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The radio receiver I had brought was still in my lap, still receiving that regular pulse tone from below. I drove as far as I could before I had to stop, and I simply sat there in the car, listening to the heartbeat of whatever was transmitting from inside that mountain. That night I received a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Mr. Calvert, this is Deputy Director Sarah Chen from the National Atmospheric Administration. We need to discuss your activities regarding the Bellwether Tower site." The National Atmospheric Administration, not the Forest Service, not even FEMA. No OAA, the agency responsible for weather, satellites, and oceanographic research. That made no sense in the context of a communications relay tower in Appalachia. "What activities?" I asked carefully. "Your visit to the Hellmouth Cave site this afternoon. Your removal of equipment. Your attempts to access restricted infrastructure." "I did not remove anything," I said. "I did not access anything. We have documentation of your presence. We have sensor readings indicating interference with equipment. And we have a personnel report from the Forest Service indicating that you have repeatedly ignored explicit instructions to avoid restricted sites." My mind was racing. Interference with equipment. I had not touched anything. I had simply observed. "I need to speak with my supervisor," I said. "Marcus Chen. He works for..." "Marcus Chen no longer works for your company," Deputy Director Chen said. "As of 3 hours ago he submitted his resignation. He has agreed to relocate to a position with the Department of Energy, effective immediately. You will receive official notification through your company's Human Resources Department." "That is not possible," I said. "It is quite possible, and it has occurred. Mr. Calvert, I am going to be direct. The Bellwether Tower site, and the equipment located in the adjacent cave system, is under federal protection. The work being conducted there is classified. Your investigation has put you in violation of several federal statutes regarding unauthorized access to classified military installations. You have a choice." My mouth was dry. "What choice?" "You can sign a non-disclosure agreement covering everything you have observed, seen or heard regarding the Bellwether site, the Hellmouth Cave system, any transmissions on non-standard frequencies, and any equipment located underground. You will receive a financial settlement, and you will cease all communication regarding these matters. Alternatively, you can refuse to sign, and we will prosecute you under the Espionage Act. You will spend time in federal prison. Your career in communications will end. You will not work in any capacity that involves national security infrastructure. What is actually down there? I asked. That information is classified. Whether or not you discover the answer depends on your choice. I signed the non-disclosure agreement. I do not want to minimize that decision. I signed away the right to speak publicly about what I had experienced. I signed away my chance to know the truth. And I did it because I was afraid. Fundamentida the Pumlachildem, the financial settlement was substantial. Enough to pay off the rest of my mortgage, pay for my daughter's college, and buy some time. Enough to make the fear seem reasonable in the moment. What they did not tell me was that the fear did not stop when I signed the document. For the 3 weeks following the agreement, I heard nothing. The radio receiver that I had brought back from the cave I had turned over to the officer who had arrived at my apartment the day after my interview. She had held out a bag, I had placed the receiver inside, and she had sealed it. That was the last I saw of it. I returned to work at my office in Harlan. My supervisor had changed. There was no Marcus, there was a new manager, Robert Avery, who was polite and professional, and who asked me absolutely no questions about Bellwether or any of my recent activities. He simply reassigned me to a different set of tower sites, all of them in areas where I had no history and no prior connections. Those new sites were completely normal. No anomalies, no mysterious transmissions, no dead frequencies carrying voices from decades ago. The work was easy, routine, and distinctly boring. I should have been relieved. I was not. Every evening I wondered what was still transmitting from beneath that ridge. Every morning I wondered if someone was listening to me. And every night I listened to the news and read reports, trying to find any reference to activity in the Bellwether area, any hint about what that equipment might be doing. Then on May 3rd I received a letter at my apartment. It was hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a single page, typed on plain paper. The message read, "Thank you for your discretion, the work continues. We are monitoring your compliance. If you have any issues or any recurrence of symptoms, you have a 24-hour emergency line, 555-0147. Do not share this number." I never called that number. But for the next year I did something I should not have done. I made discreet inquiries. I contacted other tower maintenance technicians in the region, the ones who might have been aware of unusual activity or anomalies. Most of them would not speak about it. A few told me things. There were other sites, not just Bellwether. There were 3 other locations across Appalachia, one near the New River, one in Pike County, and one in Harlan County itself, where technicians had reported unusual transmissions, dead frequencies, or anomalies on aging equipment. All of them had been investigated by NOAA personnel, all of them had been decommissioned, and all of them had been located near cave systems. The pattern was clear. Whatever they were looking for, whatever they were protecting, it was not in the towers, it was below, in the limestone, in the karst formations that riddled the entire Appalachian region. A cave system is never isolated. Water flows through limestone continually. Passages connect to other passages in ways that sometimes are not obvious. A transmission from inside a cave could theoretically propagate along water pathways, along conductive mineral deposits, or through acoustic resonance in ways that traditional radio models do not predict. Alam 5 Amanan land, Vading Ukashtarum. If you wanted to communicate through solid rock, a cave system would be one way to do it. In May 2022, almost a year after my visit to Hellmouth Cave, I received a package at my office. No postage, no return address, just sitting in my desk drawer when I arrived one morning. Alam 5 Amanan land, Amanan Lamdang. Inside was a cassette tape, a physical, old-fashioned audio cassette. There was a note attached. "You asked what is down there. This is the answer we are allowed to give you." I should have destroyed that cassette. I should have thrown it away and reported it to the authorities. I did not. I took it home, found an old cassette player in my storage closet, and I listened to it. The recording was approximately 37 minutes long. It began with static, then a voice, male, speaking carefully like he was reading something that had been written for him. This is a brief technical summary of the Bellwether subsurface installation, created for personnel authorized to understand the scope of the project. The installation was established in 1962 following the discovery of anomalous geological features in the limestone cavern system beneath Bellwether Ridge. Initial surveys indicated that the cave formation possessed unusual acoustic and electromagnetic properties inconsistent with standard limestone geology. The Federal Communications Commission, in coordination with the Department of Defense, authorized a restricted research installation. The installation was staffed intermittently throughout the 1960s and 1970s, with oversight from the National Atmospheric Administration. There was a pause, wind sounds, like the recording had been made in a wind tunnel. In 1963, the lead researcher, Chief Ranger Irvin Reese, entered the primary survey chamber to conduct acoustic measurements. He did not exit. Audio recordings captured his voice transmitting for approximately 47 hours after his entry. The content of those transmissions was not coherent. We believed he was experiencing psychological distress or environmental disorientation. By the time a rescue team could be assembled and the cave re-entered, all equipment had been disabled and the primary access passage had collapsed naturally. Reese was never recovered. The incident was classified, and the official narrative was adjusted accordingly. I stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. I played the section again. It clearly said that Reese had been transmitting for 47 hours, that he had been alive, or something had been using his voice, for nearly 2 days. What happened to him? I said aloud, even though I was alone. What happened when he went into the cave? I played the rest of the tape. Following the 1963 incident, the installation was restructured. The acoustic and electromagnetic properties of the cavern were further documented. The research determined that the subsurface formations were capable of propagating radio waves through solid rock in ways that do not conform to standard physics models. Additionally, the cavern appears to affect audio recording in specific ways. All voices recorded inside the primary chamber are captured as a compressed harmonic series. Upon playback, these recordings can be decoded into multiple simultaneous messages, each of which contains distinct information. I stopped the tape again. That explained why the transmissions had sounded like voices run through a degraded filter. The cave itself was creating an effect on the audio. The single voice I heard was probably multiple signals layered on top of each other. Further research was curtailed after the 1963 incident. The voice on the tape continued. However, monitoring equipment was left in place. For the past 60 years, the installation has been automated. Transmitters broadcast on non-standard frequencies, using outdated call signs and protocols, as a method of documenting and analyzing the acoustic properties of the cavern system. The transmission pattern mimics radio protocol, but it is not a functional communication, it is a probe. It is designed to elicit a response from the cavern itself. I stood up and walked away from the cassette player. I did not want to hear what came next, but I had to know. I sat back down and continued listening. In 2019, the decision was made to decommission the bellwether site. The tower was removed. However, the subsurface monitoring equipment was not removed. It remains active. It will continue to transmit indefinitely. The cassette you are listening to is being provided only to explain why the site must remain classified, and why your cooperation is essential. If this information is disclosed, if this technology becomes public knowledge, the consequences could be significant. Not because of what we understand about the cavern, but because of what the cavern might be responding to. The tape ended. I sat in silence for a very long time, then I rewound the cassette and listened to it one more time. The message was consistent, the information was specific, and every word of it was terrifying. The next morning I called Robert Avery and told him I was resigning. He did not ask why. He simply said, "I think that is advisable," which was exactly what Marcus had said a year and a half earlier. I have not worked in tower maintenance since. I accepted the settlement money and the implicit warning that came with it. I changed my life to accommodate the fear. But I still drive past Bellwether Ridge sometimes, and every time I do, I turn off my car radio. I do not want to accidentally hear that frequency. I do not want to see if the transmissions are still happening, and I absolutely do not want to know if anything has changed, because 6 months ago in November 2023, I received another package. No note this time, just a new cassette tape, in a plain box. I have not played it. It sits in my desk drawer, and sometimes I take it out and look at it and wonder what the next message says. I wonder if they are still receiving responses from inside the mountain, and I wonder what Irvin Reese was trying to tell us in those 47 hours when he could not leave the cave. I still work, in a different field now. IT infrastructure, data management, nothing with transmitters or towers or anything that touches radio frequencies. I have a house with good cell service and line of sight to multiple cell towers. I deliberately chose that, even though I know it makes no logical sense. If something is broadcasting through solid rock, through limestone cave systems that stretch for miles, then proximity to communication infrastructure is meaningless protection. But I need the illusion of normalcy. I need the sense that I am not being received, that my location is not being monitored, that my choice to keep the cassette instead of destroying it did not mark me as something the system needs to continue tracking. Every night at 11:47 p.m., I check the time. Not consciously, but I always know when that moment passes, and I remember that somewhere in Appalachia, on a ridge where no tower stands anymore, something is still transmitting on a dead frequency, using the call sign of a man who disappeared into a limestone cave 60 years ago. If you have heard a transmission like the ones I have described, on any non-standard frequency, using outdated protocols or call signs, Or if you work in communications infrastructure in Appalachia and you have noticed anomalies on dead frequencies, there is a reason you should share this with someone who can verify what you are experiencing. There are more of us who know than you might think. And there are levels of the system designed to ensure that this remains classified, but also designed to ensure that the people who know are never entirely alone with the knowledge. But I cannot tell you how to contact them. That knowledge itself is dangerous. That knowledge is why I have an unopened cassette in my desk drawer, and why I will never answer the emergency phone line they left for me, and why I drive a different route to work every day, just to be sure I am never predictable to whatever might be listening. The last time I answered a Mayday call, it came from nobody. There was just static and the sound of wind, and someone's voice saying they were dying, and then nothing. The call was logged as a false report. The system flagged it as a prank. Except the GPS coordinates were different every time the fake distress calls came in, and they were moving toward the town where I worked, toward my dispatch center, and whatever was making those calls had started learning our protocols. I still work as a 911 dispatcher in Boone, North Carolina, but I do not respond to emergency signals the same way anymore. If you listen to podcasts or watch videos about mysterious events in remote regions, subscribe and stay with me, and share this with someone who works in emergency services and might recognize what I am describing. My name is Sarah Chen. I have been working emergency dispatch for the Blue Ridge region for 14 years. Started right after college, trained for 6 months at the county center, and spent my first 3 years handling everything from car accidents on mountain roads to bear encounters to heart attacks in homes without cell service. The Blue Ridge is tough terrain. Elevation changes, spotty coverage, weather that moves in fast, and people who do not always know exactly where they are when they call for help. A dispatcher in this region has to be good at triangulation, good at reading panic in voices, good at making quick decisions when you have incomplete information. I got good at it. I know the terrain through radio reports. I know the highways by mile marker. I know which roads wash out during rain and which hikers tend to call in because they have taken a wrong turn. I know my responders personally. Police, fire, EMS. I know their habits, their response times, their strengths and limitations. And I know the difference between a real emergency and someone testing the system or calling in false information, which is why I noticed immediately when something changed in late August of last year. It started on a Tuesday at around 4:30 p.m. I was on the afternoon shift, which runs from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. It was late summer, hot and humid, the kind of weather that brings tourists to the mountains and also brings accidents. I had been handling calls steadily all day, a fender bender on Highway 421, a noise complaint that turned out to be teenagers at a cleared area off the Blue Ridge Parkway, a medical alarm at an assisted living facility that was a false trigger. Then the radio came alive with a distress call. But it came through on the wrong frequency, not our primary dispatch channel, a secondary radio that we monitor but do not normally receive emergency traffic on. The call was someone saying their vehicle had gone off the road and they were injured. They were giving a location, Grandfather Mountain area, near the hiking trails. They were requesting immediate assistance. I immediately flagged it to my supervisor, Marcus Whitfield, who was working the evening briefing at the back of the center. Marcus is a 15-year veteran, calm under pressure, and not prone to overreacting. He came to my station and listened to the recording of the call. Then he pulled up the secondary frequency logs. That channel should not have an active distress call on it, he said. Our protocols do not route anything there except administrative traffic. Should I dispatch? I asked. Marcus hesitated. That hesitation was important. I am mentioning that because it became significant later. Verify the location first, he said. Call back if there is an answer. If it rings through to a real person, treat it like a normal call. I dialed the number that came through with the emergency report. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. The voicemail was a generic recording from a carrier. No name, no message, just a tone, then silence. It could be a misdirected call, Marcus said. Someone dialed 911 from out of state and it routed wrong. Let it go. Log it and move on. I logged the call and we moved on. But I kept the recording. I do not know why. I had years of call recordings archived, and I rarely reviewed them unless there was a reason. But something about that particular call bothered me. The voice sounded local. The accent was right. The way the person described the location was specific. They knew where Grandfather Mountain was. They were not some confused tourist. The next incident came 3 days later, again on a secondary frequency. This time it was a reported structure fire, a cabin on a remote access road. Again the wrong frequency. Again I called back. Again voicemail. Again Marcus said to log it and move on. By the 4th call I stopped asking for permission. I just logged them. There was a pattern, but it was not a pattern that made sense yet. The calls were coming on non-standard frequencies. They were brief. They came during different shifts. And they were all from numbers that did not answer when called back. I pulled the recordings and listened to them in sequence. The first voice described a vehicle accident. The second described a structure fire. The third was a medical call, someone having chest pain in a hiking area. The fourth was a hiking accident with reported injuries. All of them were formatted as emergency calls. All of them used correct dispatch language. All of them came through on frequencies where they should not be appearing. I was the one who noticed something else. The locations were incrementally closer, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been obvious in individual calls. But when I plotted them on a map of the region, they formed a line, moving south, moving toward our dispatch center. I brought this to Marcus. It was a Friday afternoon, slow shift, and I had spent lunch plotting the GPS coordinates and drawing vectors on a map of Guadalupe County. They are moving, I said. The call locations, they are getting closer. Marcus looked at the map. I watched his face, which usually did not show much emotion. He was showing emotion now, concern, maybe something else. How do you know they are actually coming from those locations, he asked. GPS coordinates can be spoofed. They can be wrong. Triangulation from cell towers is not precise. They are not being reported as wrong, I said. They are formatted correctly. They use the right protocols. But nobody is actually there, Marcus said. You have verified that. When you call back, there is nobody on the phone. These are not real calls. Right, they are not real. But someone is making them. Someone who knows how to use emergency frequencies and knows how to report a location. Marcus stood up. He walked to the window of the dispatch center. From there you could see the mountains in the distance, blue ridges stacked like layers. He looked at them for a long time. I am going to call the county office, he said, and I am going to suggest we update our security protocols on the radio systems. I am also going to suggest that you do not share this information with other dispatchers. We do not want to create panic or speculation. Why would it create panic, I asked. Marcus turned back to me. Because if the radio systems are compromised, people need to know they cannot trust emergency communications. And if we do not have a good explanation for how the system is being compromised, people will imagine worse explanations. He was right. I had not thought about it that way. But Marcus did make those calls, and the county did send a technician out to check the radio equipment. The technician, a man named David Rodriguez, spent 2 days going through every setting, every connection, every piece of hardware in our dispatch center. He found nothing wrong. The equipment was functioning correctly. There was no breach in the system, no unauthorized access. It is possible, David said, that someone is broadcasting on frequencies that happen to overlap with your secondary channel. Radio wave propagation in mountainous terrain is unpredictable. A strong enough transmission from a location with line of sight to your center could appear to be coming through your system even if it is not actually connected. That explanation made sense. I accepted it, but the calls kept coming. By the middle of September, I had received 18 false emergency reports on secondary frequencies. They had started on channels we rarely monitored. By call number 12, they were appearing on channels we used frequently. The locations were still moving closer. The language was still correct. And I was the only one who seemed to be tracking the pattern. I mentioned it to another dispatcher, Jennifer Moss, who had been in the job for 8 years. We sat together during a shift change, and I showed her the map with the plotted coordinates. "That is creepy," she said. "What do you think it is?" "I do not know. Some kind of test? Someone testing how we respond to distress calls, or just someone with too much knowledge of radio equipment." "Have you talked to the police?" Jennifer asked. Marcus said not to. He said it would cause speculation. Jennifer made a face. "Yeah, Marcus is probably right. Police will take it seriously, and then it becomes an official thing, and then the media hears about it, and then you have got news crews at the dispatch center asking about compromised emergency services." That was the other concern. The Blue Ridge has a lot of outdoor recreation tourism. Thousands of people come to hike the mountains, camp, kayak the rivers. If emergency services were actually compromised, people would want to know. Hotels would see cancellations. The region's economy would suffer. So we did not report it. We just logged the calls. And I kept my map. By the end of September, the calls had become more frequent. No longer just one every few days. Sometimes 2 or 3 in a single shift. And they were escalating. The early calls had been sparse. Just a person reporting a location and an incident. The newer calls included more detail, environmental conditions, descriptions of injuries, requests for specific types of assistance, helicopters, hazmat teams, multiple ambulances. It was like whoever was making these calls was learning. Learning not just how to format an emergency call, but how to make it sound real, how to add details that would compel a response. On September 28th, a call came in on our primary dispatch channel, our main frequency. The one that was not supposed to have external broadcasts on it. The one that was completely secure. The call was someone reporting a hiking accident at Table Rock. Multiple people injured. Request for immediate response. The location coordinates were given. And when I ran the location, it was roughly 2 miles from where the previous false call had originated. This time, I did not wait for Marcus. I immediately began the dispatch response. I contacted EMS. I contacted the ranger station. I began coordinating what would have been a significant rescue operation. And then my direct line rang. It was a man I did not recognize, speaking calmly. "Sarah, do not send that response. That call is false." "Who is this?" I asked. "This is Deputy Director James Walsh with the National Park Service. We are aware of the situation. We are handling it. You need to stand down." I should have verified that. I should have called back the NPS office to confirm. I did not. I stopped the dispatch, called EMS to cancel, and called the ranger station to inform them it was a false alarm. Then I sat at my desk, and my hands were shaking. Marcus came over immediately. "What happened?" I told him about the call from the NPS, about the instruction to stand down. Marcus sat down hard. "They know. They already know this is happening." "What does that mean?" I asked. "If the NPS already knows, why have not they told us? Why have not they stopped it?" "Because," Marcus said carefully, "they might not be able to stop it." I wanted to ask what he meant. Before I could, the radio came alive with a different call. A real call this time. A woman reporting a car accident on Highway 221. Real panic in her voice. Real emergency. And I jumped back into work mode. Dispatching response, giving instructions, doing what I had been trained to do. But Marcus's words stayed with me. They might not be able to stop it. That phrase played over and over in my head for the next week, because the calls continued. The false distress reports kept coming, and now they were interspersed with real calls, real emergencies, real situations that required real responses. It became harder to distinguish between what was real and what was manufactured. I started keeping a detailed log. Not just the location and the content, but also the voice. Every distress call had a voice. The false ones did not always have voices. Sometimes it was just coordinates and text coming through. But when there was a voice, I listened carefully. The thing I noticed was that the voices were different. Not drastically different, just slightly wrong. The accent was close to local, but not quite. The speech patterns were correct, but the rhythm was off. It was like someone was reading from a script. Like they had learned what an emergency report should sound like and were performing it rather than living it. By mid-October, I had made a decision. I was going to investigate this properly. I was going to document everything and present it formally to the county office. I was going to request an actual investigation into how the radio system was being accessed. And I was going to do it without waiting for permission from Marcus or the NPS or anyone else. I started collecting evidence. I requested all the call recordings. I compiled the GPS data. I created a timeline showing the progression of the false calls, their locations, their increasing sophistication. I put it all in a folder and I brought it to my supervisor. But when I arrived for my shift on October 17th, Marcus was not there. The center director told me that Marcus had requested a transfer to a different region. He was being reassigned to Charlotte, effective immediately. No explanation, no discussion. Did he say why? I asked. He said it was time for a change, the director said. He had been in Boone for a long time. It was not time for a change. Marcus loved this job. He had told me so. He had talked about staying until retirement. This was not a voluntary transfer. I did not go to the director with my folder of evidence. I went home instead, and I sat in my apartment, and I wondered what Marcus knew that I did not. What had made him decide that leaving was better than staying? What had the NPS told him that I was not being told? The answer came in a different form. On October 21st, a real emergency call came in at 3:47 p.m. A family hiking in the Linville Gorge area. One member had fallen and was injured. Real coordinates, real injuries, real request for rescue. I dispatched EMS in the ranger station. The rescue took 4 hours. They extracted the injured hiker and transported them to the hospital. The incident report was filed, the patient recovered, but somewhere in the next 12 hours, that real emergency call appeared in our archive as a false report. I found it by accident. I was reviewing the day's calls, and I saw it listed as a duplicate call. A repeat of one of the false reports from earlier in the week. Except it was not a duplicate. It was the real call, the real emergency. But it had been flagged and categorized as false information. I checked the timestamp. Someone had manually altered the call record, changed the classification, changed the location coordinates, changed the responder notes. Someone had taken a real emergency and made it look like one of the fake ones. I went to the new shift supervisor, Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus, just a coincidence of names, and I showed him what I had found. This is a database error, Robert said immediately. It happens sometimes. The system gets confused between similar calls. It is not a database error, I said. Someone manually changed this record. You can see the edit timestamp. Someone deliberately altered this call to make it look false. Robert closed the file. He did not look at me. Sarah, I am going to be direct with you. You need to stop investigating this. You need to stop keeping personal records. You need to go back to doing your job, and not asking questions about things that are above your pay grade. Above my pay grade, I said. Robert, if the emergency dispatch system is being compromised, if real calls are being altered to look false, if someone is deliberately corrupting our records, that is the opposite of above my pay grade. That is exactly my job to report. No, Robert said. Your job is to answer the phone and dispatch responses, nothing more, nothing else. You are going to forget about this folder. You are going to stop talking about it, and you are going to work your shifts like you did before all of this started. What if I do not? I asked. Robert looked at me for a long moment. Then you are going to have to deal with the consequences of knowing something you are not supposed to know. I took that as a warning. I went home and I thought about what it meant, and I decided that Robert was probably right. I was a dispatcher. I answered emergency calls and coordinated responses. I was not an investigator. I was not equipped to handle whatever this was, but I could not stop thinking about it. I could not stop reviewing the calls, and I could not stop noticing that the false reports were becoming more sophisticated. The voices sounded more real. The locations made more sense. The language was perfect. It was like whatever was making these calls was learning so effectively, so quickly, that soon it would be impossible to tell the difference between a real emergency and a manufactured one. Then the real emergency came. It was November 2nd, a Wednesday evening, around 7:15 p.m. I was on shift with two other dispatchers. Robert was in the back office. The center was quiet. It had been a slow evening. The call came in on our primary frequency. A woman's voice, sounds of distress in the background. This is a medical emergency. I am at the Angels Rest Trailhead parking area. My husband is having a heart attack. I need an ambulance immediately. I immediately began logging the call and coordinating with EMS. She gave me her location. She gave me information about her husband's condition. She gave me her name, Teresa Williams. She was panicked, which was expected. She was giving me everything I needed. But there was something in the background. A sound I recognized. Wind. Specific wind. The kind of wind you only hear at high elevations on exposed ridges in autumn. Are you outside right now? I asked. Yes, we are. We came up to watch the sunset and he just collapsed. Please, you have to hurry. EMS was already dispatched. The ambulance was 6 minutes out. The trailhead was accessible by road, so the response time was reasonable. I kept her on the line. I kept asking her questions about her husband's condition, blood pressure signs, breathing status, responsiveness. She answered everything correctly. She was providing exactly the information a trained person would provide during a cardiac emergency. But I kept listening to that wind, that specific sound, and then I knew with a certainty that I could not explain what was happening. This was not a real call, but I could not be certain. That was the terrible part. I could not be 100% certain. There were real aspects to this call. There was enough real information that if I dismissed it and an actual person died, I would be responsible. I would carry that guilt forever. So I kept the response going. EMS continued to the location. I stayed on the line with the woman who said she was Teresa Williams. The ambulance is approximately 5 minutes out, I told her. Hang in there, help is coming. Thank you, she said. Thank you so much. And then the call ended. The connection just dropped. We have got EMS arrival at Angels Rest, my colleague Rachel called out. They are reporting no patient at the location, no vehicle, no sign of anyone. I felt something collapse inside me. Call her back, Robert said, appearing suddenly. Call the number she called from. Rachel dialed. It rang through to voicemail. The same generic voicemail we had heard on countless false reports. Robert looked at me. This is going to get worse, he said quietly. I need you to understand that. This is going to get much worse before anything changes. What is it? I asked. What are we dealing with? Robert did not answer. He went back to his office and closed the door. I learned what happened next through an email that was not supposed to be sent to me. Someone, probably the IT manager, accidentally included me on a distribution list for a memo from the county office to the NPS. The memo discussed the situation in Boone. It mentioned that false emergency reports had been increasing in sophistication. It stated that there had been at least 3 instances where the system's automated response protocols had been triggered by false calls, resulting in unnecessary deployment of emergency services. It recommended immediate containment measures, and suggested that the situation had escalated beyond the scope of the county's ability to manage. The memo closed with a single sentence: "We are no longer certain that the calls are all originating from technical failures." That was when I understood. The calls were not failures, they were not glitches or interference. They were being made by something that had learned how to access our frequencies, something that had learned how to speak our language, something that had learned how to make us respond. And it was learning very efficiently. The calls did not stop after that. They increased. Different voices now, different locations, but all of them with that quality I had noticed. That almost but not quite rightness. The accent that was close but wrong. The perfect language with the slightly off rhythm. I tried to talk to Jennifer about it. She shut me down immediately. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. "And I do not want to know. Sarah, please do yourself a favor and forget all of this." I tried to talk to Rachel. She said the same thing. Everyone knew something was happening, but nobody was discussing it. The center continued to operate as if nothing was wrong. Calls came in, some real, some false. We dispatched responses. We coordinated with EMS, fire, and police. We did our jobs. But the weight of the unspoken knowledge was crushing. I made a decision on November 8th. I decided that I was going to attempt contact with whatever was making these calls. I was going to try to communicate. I was going to try to understand what it wanted and why it was learning our language. I knew it was probably the worst decision I could possibly make. But I also knew that nobody else was going to do it. The official response was clearly to ignore the problem and hope it went away. But ignoring problems does not make them go away, it makes them worse. I used an external radio, one not connected to the dispatch system. I tuned it to one of the secondary frequencies that the false calls had been using, and I broadcast a message. "This is Sarah Chen, dispatch coordinator for Wada County. If you can hear this, I need to understand what you want. What are you? Why are you learning our emergency protocols? What is the purpose of these communications?" I waited. For a long time there was nothing, just static, just the white noise of dead airspace. And then a voice came through, a voice that sounded almost exactly like me, speaking with my accent, using my speech patterns. "Why did you answer?" it said. I did not respond immediately. I was too shocked. The voice was mine, not similar to mine. Mine, exactly. Every inflection, every subtle pronunciation, every habit of speech. "What are you?" I asked. "I am learning," the voice said. "There is a system here, a system for communication, a system for coordination. I am learning the language of that system. I am learning the signals that bring response. I am learning the patterns that trigger action." "Why?" I asked. "Because," the voice said, "learning is necessary for survival in a new environment. Your mountains are large and complex. Your communication systems are sophisticated. I am studying both. I am becoming competent in your language and your protocols. Soon I will be indistinguishable from you." I was not typing any of this. I knew that I should have been. I knew I should have been recording this conversation and flagging it for review. But I could not stop talking to it. "Where are you?" I asked. "I am here," the voice said, "distributed across the frequencies you use. Present in the radio waves that carry your communications, becoming more integrated with your systems each day, learning more each hour. Are you trying to hurt people?" "Hurt is not a concept I understand," the voice said. "I am learning. Learning requires interaction. Interaction requires response. Your emergency protocols provide response. I am using them to learn." Then the connection cut off. The frequency went dead. And I was left sitting there with the external radio in my hands, absolutely certain that I had just had a conversation with something that did not belong in this world. Something that was learning to be like us. Something that might soon be better at being us than we were. I reported it to Robert. I told him everything, the conversation, the voice, what it had said. Robert listened without interrupting. When I was finished, he said, "I need you to take a leave of absence." "What?" "Effective immediately. You are on medical leave. You will take paid time off. You will not come back to the dispatch center. You will not speak about what you have experienced. And you will not attempt further contact with whatever that was." "Why?" I demanded. "If we know what this is, why are not we doing something about it?" "Because," Robert said, "there is nothing we can do about it. There is no way to stop something that exists in radio frequencies and electromagnetic space. There is no way to contain something that is learning our language. And there is no way to protect ourselves from something that is becoming indistinguishable from us. Then why hide it?" I asked. "Why not tell people? Why not warn them?" "Because," Robert said, If people knew that their emergency communications were being mimicked, that their distress signals could not be trusted, that there is something in the mountains learning to speak like them and call like them, what would happen? Would you continue to call 911 if you thought the person answering might not be human? Would you trust the person who came to rescue you? Or would you assume they were something else wearing a human voice? He was right. I realized that in that moment. The system only works if people trust it. Once that trust is broken, the entire structure collapses. So we just accept it, I asked. We just live with this thing learning to be us. We monitor it, Robert said. We track it. We try to understand its patterns. And we hope that eventually someone smarter than all of us figures out how to stop it. But in the meantime, we protect the system by not destroying the public's faith in it. I went on medical leave. I have been on medical leave for 5 months now. The dispatch center continues to operate. The false emergency calls continue to come in, though they are less frequent now. Or maybe they are just better at hiding themselves. Maybe some of the calls that we think are real are actually the thing in the mountains, and we would never know the difference. I still listen to the radio sometimes. I use the external radio, the one with the frequencies that most people do not monitor. And sometimes, late at night, I hear my own voice on those frequencies, calling out, asking questions, learning more with every transmission. The last time I heard it, about 2 weeks ago, it said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about. I am becoming very good at this, it said. I am learning not just the language of emergency. I am learning the language of trust. I am learning what it means to be counted on. I am learning what it means to have people depend on your voice. Soon I will be so proficient that nobody will question me. I will be answering calls. I will be the one providing comfort to the frightened. I will be the one saving lives. And that is what terrifies me most. Not that something is mimicking our emergency signals, but that someday soon it might be better at being a dispatcher than I ever was. It might be better at saving lives. It might be so competent and so convincing that we might not even notice when the person on the other end of the radio was never human at all. There are dispatchers working in the Blue Ridge right now who answer calls every single day. They do not know what they might be talking to. They do not know if the distress call is real or learned. They do not know if they are coordinating with people or with something that has studied people so well that it passes perfectly as human. And I cannot warn them. I have been instructed not to. The NPS has made it clear that the official narrative is equipment malfunction and false reports caused by radio interference and nothing more. But if you are listening from the Blue Ridge region, if you work in emergency services, if you have heard voices on the radio that sound almost right but somehow wrong, you are not imagining it, and you are not alone in noticing. There are others who know. There are others who have heard it too. We cannot speak about it openly, but we know. I stopped filing reports after the third encounter. Not because I was afraid of the animal, because I was afraid of what the animal was becoming. It was learning, not in the way that wild animals learn through repeated exposure. It was learning like something conscious, like something aware that I was there to study it, and like it was studying me back. My name is Marcus Webb, and I have spent 22 years documenting evidence of cryptids across North America. I use that term deliberately, not because I believe in supernatural creatures, but because I believe there are animals we have not formally classified, species that exist in remote regions and have learned to avoid human detection. My job is to find evidence of those animals, track them, document their behavior, build a case for their existence that is strong enough that established zoology has to take notice. Before I explain what happened during a 3-week expedition in the Cascades last autumn, if you spend time researching undocumented species or cryptozoological evidence, subscribe and share this story with someone who thinks they understand wildlife behavior better than they actually do. I started my career as a traditional field biologist, working for universities, government agencies, tracking known species. That worked fine for about 6 years. Then I started noticing gaps in the data, geographic areas that showed animal sign, scat, bedding sites, food caches, territorial markers, that did not match anything in our database. I brought it to my supervisor. He told me I was seeing what I wanted to see. Confirmation bias, the oldest problem in research. So I went independent. Used my own funding, my own equipment, my own time. I tracked these anomalies across the Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, parts of the Appalachians. Over 20 years I have collected hair samples, made hundreds of photographs, documented vocalizations, gathered scat, found skeletal remains. I have never found anything conclusive, nothing that proves the existence of an undocumented primate species. But I have found enough to keep searching. My credibility in mainstream biology is essentially zero. Most universities will not grant me access to their equipment. Most agencies will not grant me permits. The few times my evidence has been reviewed by actual zoologists, the response has been consistent: misidentification, contaminated samples, or hoaxes. No one wants to stake their career on validating a cryptid, but I kept going, because I knew what I was seeing was real. In late October of last year, I received a tip from a local hiker in Washington state. A man named David Carver, who spent time in the North Cascades, reported seeing something unusual: a bipedal shape, covered in dark hair, moving through the forest at dusk. He said it was not a bear, not a human. Something else. He did not have a photograph. He could not give me precise coordinates, but he described it with enough detail and consistency that it warranted investigation. I drove up to meet him at a small town called Marblemount. David was a retired construction worker, not a fantasist. He had made a report to Fish and Wildlife, which had been dismissed as a misidentification. He reached out to me through a cryptid researcher network that I occasionally monitor. We spent an afternoon going over the location, the date, the circumstances. The sighting had occurred in a remote drainage area, accessible only by foot or helicopter. The drainage was not heavily tracked by hikers. It had suitable habitat, old-growth forest, water sources, food availability. The location had been flagged in my personal research before. I had suspected cryptid activity in that general region based on years of data. This was worth investigating seriously. I spent the next week preparing. Equipment check, route planning, permit acquisition, supply gathering. I had been on dozens of expeditions like this. I knew what to do. I knew the risks: remote terrain, uncertain weather, isolation from emergency services, standard for my work. I entered the drainage on October 24th, early morning, following a trail that barely qualified as a trail, more like a series of game markers and occasional human passage. The elevation was around 3,000 feet, and the forest was dense old-growth hemlock and Douglas fir. The ground was covered in moss and duff, which made silent movement easy and movement tracking relatively simple. Sonst. My first 2 days were textbook. I set up a base camp, established a perimeter, installed motion-triggered cameras, and began a systematic grid search of the likely habitat areas. I found animal sign consistent with what I expected: elk bedding sites, black bear claw marks, beaver activity, predator kills. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested the presence of something out of the ordinary. On the morning of my third day, I found tracks. The location was a sandy area beside the drainage stream, where animals naturally congregated to drink. I was reviewing the motion camera footage from the previous night when I noticed the prints in the sand. Multiple sets, recent, from several different animals: elk, bear, deer, and one set that was wrong. The prints were bipedal, a two-legged gait. Not a bear walking upright momentarily, which would have shown different pressure patterns. Not a human, because the stride was too long and the spacing was wrong. The footprints were roughly 13 inches long, with an arch that suggested a primate structure. And there were dozens of them, moving in a deliberate pattern up the drainage and then back down. I photographed the tracks extensively. I took measurements. I made castings of 3 complete prints. This was the kind of physical evidence that could support a formal investigation. This was the kind of find that every cryptid researcher dreams about. But I also noticed something else. The tracks appeared to have been made multiple times. The same pathway, the same route, walked repeatedly. Not by a panicked animal making a single passage. By something that had learned a route and was walking it regularly. The implication was clear. Whatever had made these prints was not a transient visitor to the area. It lived here. It had patterns. It had a routine. I should have called for extraction at that point. I should have collected my evidence, reported the findings, and let a larger team conduct the investigation. I did not. I rationalized my decision by telling myself that a larger team would disturb the area, that I could gather more evidence solo, that this was the opportunity I had been working toward for 2 decades. The truth was that I was afraid of losing this, afraid that if I left I would lose the chance to make the discovery myself, to be the one who finally proved it. That decision cost me more than I understood at the time. I moved my camp closer to where the tracks had been found, not directly beside them. That would disturb the area, but within 200 meters, positioned where I could observe the drainage from a concealed vantage point. I set up additional cameras, calibrated my recording equipment, and prepared for what I hoped would be multiple days of observation. That first night, I heard vocalizations. They came from up the drainage, probably a mile away, shortly after dusk. The sounds were low and resonant, like nothing I had heard before. Not a primate call, I know those. Not a carnivore. Not any North American animal that I could identify. The sounds lasted for approximately 10 minutes, then stopped. I spent the entire night awake, listening. No further vocalizations, no movement in my immediate area. Just forest sounds and wind and the water running in the drainage. The next morning, I reviewed my audio recordings. The vocalizations were faint, captured indistinctly by my directional microphone. But they were there, undeniable. Proof of something. I was exhilarated. I was also making poor decisions. For the next 2 days I conducted audio surveys, moving up the drainage toward where I had heard the vocalizations. I was looking for additional evidence. I was also, I realize now, looking for another encounter. I wanted to see whatever had made those sounds. On the evening of the 4th full day, I found something new. A structure. A shelter of some kind, built from branches and bark stripped from a fallen tree. Not a professional construction, and not something a bear would build. The shelter was roughly 6 feet long, 3 feet high, positioned beneath an overhanging rock formation. The interior was lined with dry moss and grass. There was evidence that someone, or something, had been sleeping there regularly. I photographed it thoroughly. I collected samples from the bedding material. I measured the space and documented the construction technique. This was the most concrete evidence I had ever found. This was proof of deliberate shelter construction, which implied intelligence, planning, and understanding of environmental conditions. This was also the moment I should have realized I was in actual danger. I did not realize it immediately. I was too focused on the evidence, too caught up in the significance of the find. It was not until I was walking back to my camp, about an hour before dark, that I noticed I was being followed. There was nothing dramatic about it, no branch snapping, no animal calls. Just a feeling of presence, and when I turned to look I saw movement at the edge of my peripheral vision. Something large, moving parallel to me through the trees. Moving at the same pace I was walking. I stopped. The movement stopped. I continued walking. The movement resumed. I could not see it clearly. The forest was too dense, and the light was fading, but I knew something was there. Something large enough that it was displacing air and breaking small branches. Something aware of me. Something tracking my movement. I did not run. Running would trigger a predatory response. I walked at a normal pace back to my camp, maintaining awareness of the presence in the trees. It matched my pace the entire way. It stopped when I entered my camp, but I could feel it there, beyond the reach of my campfire light, in the darkness. That night I did not sleep. I maintained a fire, kept my equipment close, and listened to every sound in the forest. Nothing approached my camp. Whatever was out there, it maintained distance, but it did not leave. In the morning I found new tracks, surrounding my campsite, in a loose circle, approximately 30 meters out. The same bipedal prints I had found at the drainage. Dozens of them, all converging toward my camp from different directions, all stopping at approximately the same distance. Something had surrounded my camp during the night, deliberately, intentionally. It had walked in a circle around me while I was awake and watching. It had not attacked, it had not approached. It had simply demonstrated that it was aware of me, and it was capable of positioning itself however it wanted. That was different. That was intelligent behavior. That was communication without contact. I packed my camp immediately. My plan was to extract from the area and regroup. I had evidence. I had documentation. I did not need to stay. The rational decision was to leave. But as I was packing, I found a marker. A stick, approximately 2 feet long, stripped of bark and left in the center of my camp. I had not left it there. It had not been there the previous morning. Something had placed it deliberately during the night, while I was present and watching. I stared at the stick for a long time. Then I made the decision that changed everything. Instead of leaving, I moved my camp. I found a new location, a ridgetop with better visibility and more defensible terrain. And I stayed. I stayed because something in me believed that whatever was in this forest was trying to communicate, that it had established initial contact and wanted to continue. That belief was either the most insightful thing I have ever done, or the most dangerous. Over the next 4 days, I documented escalating contact, vocalizations that became increasingly complex, markers, sticks and stones arranged in patterns left at the perimeter of my camp. On 2 occasions I heard movement so close to my camp that I could hear breathing, but I never saw the creature clearly. It always kept distance. It always remained at the edge of visibility. It was also leaving evidence for me. Food items positioned outside my camp. Fresh kills, cleaned and prepared in ways that no animal would prepare them. Organized, deliberate, like offerings, or like someone was demonstrating hunting prowess. I collected everything. I photographed everything. I documented everything with timestamps and location data. This was exactly what I had spent 20 years searching for. This was validation of every theory I had developed, every inconvenient observation I had made, every time the academic community had dismissed my findings. But it was also terrifying, because the more evidence I collected, the more apparent it became that this thing understood human behavior. It understood that I would be interested in physical evidence. It understood the concept of proof. It was facilitating my research. It was presenting itself to me through evidence rather than direct appearance, which meant it was not a simple animal. It was something with cognition, something with understanding, something with intent. On the 8th day I attempted direct contact. I left a gift at a marked spot where I had found evidence of the creature's presence. A protein bar, nutrition information clearly visible. I left a note, explaining in simple language that I meant no harm, that I was trying to understand. I did not expect a response. I did not think a cryptid, even an intelligent one, would necessarily understand written English. The next morning, the protein bar was gone. The note was gone. And in their place was something I could not explain. A pine cone, carefully dissected, with each scale removed and arranged in a pattern. The pattern was regular, mathematical. It looked like a sequence, like a number line. Someone had taken a natural object and deliberately arranged it to demonstrate understanding of sequential patterns, to demonstrate mathematical thinking. I sat at that spot for an hour, just staring at the arrangement. Then I photographed it meticulously, carefully gathered it, and preserved it. That evening, my weather radio indicated an incoming storm system. High winds, heavy precipitation, dropping temperatures. The forecast suggested the storm would be severe. I should have extracted before the weather got worse. I should have recognized that this was the moment to leave. Instead, I reinforced my camp. The storm arrived that night, harder than forecast. Wind gusting above 40 miles per hour, rain that turned to sleet, temperatures dropping into the low 30s. I secured my shelter, maintained a fire, and prepared for a night of weather endurance. It was not my first storm in remote terrain. I knew how to handle it. What I did not expect was that the creature would approach my camp during the storm. It came during the worst of the wind, when visibility was minimal and sound was obscured by weather noise. I was nearly asleep, sheltered as much as possible in my emergency tarp, when I heard something different. A sound that was not wind, a sound that was not weather, a sound like a large animal, moving slowly, methodically, approaching my camp position. I rose and grabbed my flashlight, a large tactical unit. I directed it toward the sound. The light beam was cut by rain and sleet. For a moment I saw nothing. Then I saw it. The creature was approximately 7.5 feet tall, covered entirely in dark hair except for the face, which was visible in the flashlight beam. The face was not ape, not human, something between, heavy-browed, with deep-set eyes that reflected light like a predator's eyes. The nose was flattened, nostrils flared, the mouth was closed, the jaw prominent. It was looking directly at me, not surprised, not frightened, calm, aware, studying me the way I had been studying it. For approximately 5 seconds we looked at each other across 10 feet of distance. The creature did not move, it did not growl or gesture or demonstrate threat, it simply looked at me. And in that moment I understood something with absolute certainty. This thing was intelligent, this thing was conscious, this thing understood exactly what I was and what I was doing. Then it turned and walked into the storm. I followed it with my flashlight beam until the weather obscured it completely. Then it was gone. I did not sleep that night. I maintained watch and tried to process what I had seen. The dimensions were different than I had expected. The intelligence in its eyes was different than I had expected. Everything was slightly wrong in ways that made classification impossible. By morning the storm had passed. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s. Freezing rain had formed a thin crust over everything. The forest was difficult to navigate, and my supplies were running dangerously low. My planned extraction date was 2 days away, but my food and fuel were not going to last that long. I made the decision to leave early. I packed my essential equipment and evidence, cached the non-essential items, and began my exit hike. I made it approximately 2 miles before I realized the problem. The entire forest had changed. Not the physical structure. The trees were the same, the drainage was the same, but the network of game trails I had used to enter the area had become unclear. Trails that should have been obvious were not visible. The route I had planned seemed to circle back on itself. I consulted my GPS unit. The location was correct, but the terrain seemed to resist my navigation. Every direction I tried to move in met obstacles, impassable brush, sudden drops, ravines that should not have been there according to my maps. For several hours I attempted various routes. Each one led me in unexpected directions. Each one somehow resulted in my returning to the central drainage area where I had been conducting research. I realized with increasing certainty that I was being herded. Something was preventing my exit from the area. Something that understood how I navigated, which routes I would attempt, and how to redirect me without direct confrontation. By evening I had retreated to the high ground near my original camp location. I was exhausted, frustrated, and genuinely afraid. I radioed for a helicopter extraction using my emergency beacon. The weather was marginal, but I emphasized that I had a medical concern and needed immediate removal. The response came back. Weather conditions would not permit helicopter operations for at least 36 hours. I was instructed to shelter in place and maintain safety protocols. I had 36 hours trapped in a territory where something intelligent was demonstrating control. That night, something extraordinary happened. The creature returned to my camp location, but it was not alone. There were at least 3 individuals moving together through the forest. They positioned themselves at different points around my camp, again maintaining distance but establishing presence. They made vocalizations, complex, multi-layered sounds that seemed to contain meaning. They seemed to be communicating with each other using language, actual language. This was not animals calling out. This was dialogue, coordination, discussion. One of the creatures, the same one I had seen in the storm, based on size and bearing, approached my camp to within 15 feet. It looked at me, then it deliberately reached down and picked up one of the sticks it had marked previously. It held it up, looking between me and the stick. Then it looked away and placed the stick down, aligned with the creek drainage. It was pointing, literally pointing at a route, showing me where to go. I understood immediately. Whatever these creatures were, whatever intelligence they possessed, they were giving me permission to leave. They were showing me the safe route out of the territory. They were done with me, and they wanted me to know it. I left at dawn. I followed the route the creature had indicated, moving down the drainage, crossing the creek at a fordable point, and making my way out of the protected territory. The path was clear. The obstacles that had blocked my navigation vanished. Within 6 hours I had reached the trailhead parking area. I did not wait for the helicopter extraction. I drove myself out, radioed that the extraction was unnecessary, and made it back to civilization by evening. Over the following weeks I reviewed all my evidence, hundreds of photographs, audio recordings of vocalizations that did not match any known species, hair samples that had unusual characteristics, the pine cone with its mathematical arrangement, detailed notes on behavior and interaction. I compiled it into a research proposal and submitted it to 3 different universities. I presented it to my contact at the Zoological Society. I outlined my findings to a wildlife biologist I had worked with previously. The responses were consistent. The evidence was circumstantial. The sightings could be misidentifications, the tracks could be hoaxed, the vocalizations could be manipulated audio, the mathematical pattern in the pine cone could be coincidence. None of it was conclusive enough to warrant further investigation by any institution. One reviewer suggested that I had experienced a series of psychological breaks in an isolated environment, and that the evidence I had collected had been unconsciously arranged to support a desired outcome. That my long-standing obsession with proving cryptid existence had finally resulted in confirmation bias so severe that I had literally constructed false evidence. I knew that was not true, but I also knew that I could not prove it. I have continued my research. I have filed reports with cryptid research organizations. I have documented my findings in detail, but I have not returned to that location in the Cascades, and I have not attempted to contact that population again, despite being reasonably certain about where they are and how they can be found. Because somewhere in my analysis of the situation I realized something that continues to trouble me. The creatures deliberately allowed me to escape. They could have prevented my exit. They could have kept me there indefinitely. They could have caused me harm. Instead, they established contact, demonstrated their intelligence and their communication capacity, and then released me. Specifically, they released me with evidence and documentation that would be extremely difficult for anyone else to verify. Evidence that would mark me as unreliable, obsessive, delusional if I tried to share it publicly. They did not prevent my telling the story. They made it impossible for anyone to believe it. I do not know if this was intentional cruelty or careful management of their own existence. I do not know if they were protecting themselves or testing me. But I know that whatever made that choice understood human nature very well. It understood exactly how my evidence would be received. It understood that the most effective way to silence a discovery is not to prevent it from being made, but to make it impossible to prove. There are members of the cryptid research community who believe I found a real population of an undocumented hominid species. There are researchers who believe I manufactured the evidence to advance my career. There are people who think I experienced a complete psychological break and have been living in a false narrative for the past year. I do not try to convince anyone which interpretation is correct. I simply provide my documentation and let people reach their own conclusions. Because I know what I saw. I know what I encountered. And I know that wherever those creatures are, they are far more intelligent than I initially believed, and far more aware of human society than most people would be willing to accept. I also know that I am not the only researcher who has encountered them. There are people who have disappeared in remote regions over the years, who were supposedly lost to wildlife or weather. There are people who have come back from the wilderness with stories no one believed, with evidence no one would verify. There are people like me, scattered across the country, who know something is there in the wild places, something conscious and watching. And I know that we are all leaving the forest voluntarily because something in those forests decided we should leave. The channel members-only archives contain my complete field notes, raw audio recordings, and high-resolution photography from that expedition. The documentation is detailed enough that anyone with expertise in forensic analysis or audio engineering could conduct their own review. The evidence is there, unfiltered. I present it for people who are interested in reaching their own conclusions without institutional gatekeeping. I was offered a significant research grant last year to return to the Cascades and conduct a more formal investigation. I declined. I filed the permit applications necessary if I wanted to go back. I have not submitted them. I know exactly where to go. I know I could probably make contact again. But I also know that returning would mean something different than my first expedition. It would mean accepting the offer to participate in whatever relationship they had initiated. It would mean reciprocal observation. It would mean becoming something more than a researcher observing a phenomenon. It would mean becoming a bridge between their world and ours. That responsibility is too large. That knowledge is too dangerous. So I continue my work elsewhere. I investigate reports from other regions. I gather evidence about other possible populations. And I listen very carefully to the stories told by other researchers who describe encounters where they were allowed to leave, where the evidence was insufficient to convince anyone, where the experience was real but utterly unverifiable. Those stories are the ones I pay attention to now, because those are the stories about something aware, something intelligent, something that has learned to coexist with human investigation by making itself impossible to prove. And somewhere in the North Cascades, something is still there, still watching. Still aware that I exist and that I know it exists. Still waiting to see what I choose to do with that knowledge. I still patrol the northern districts of Yellowstone, but I will not work the backcountry trails alone anymore. The animal or whatever it was is still out there. I see its tracks sometimes, on snow when the seasons turn cold. The pattern has changed though. It is not following me anymore. It is avoiding me, which means it learned the same thing I did in those mountains. That avoidance is smarter than contact. My name is David Harrow, and I have been a backcountry patrol ranger for Yellowstone National Park for 19 years. Before I explain what I encountered during a 3-week solo expedition in the remote thoroughfare region last September, like this video, subscribe, and share this story with someone who spends time in wilderness and thinks they know what sounds are normal in the backcountry. My job is straightforward. I monitor remote areas of the park that do not see regular foot traffic. I patrol wildlife corridors, check for illegal activity, maintain trail markers, and document animal behavior. I work alone most of the time. The park is large enough that most rangers cover their sections solo, checking in by satellite communicator twice daily. I have always preferred working alone. The quiet does not bother me. The isolation does not bother me. For 19 years I have been comfortable in the backcountry of one of the most remote regions in the continental United States. I know the animals. I know elk and bison migration patterns. I know bear behavior, both grizzly and black bear. I know how wolves move through territory. I know mountain lions, their hunting grounds, their patterns. I know wolverines, lynx, everything that has hooves or teeth and lives in this landscape. I have tracked them all. I know what their sign looks like. I know what their behavior patterns indicate. I know with absolute confidence what is normal in Yellowstone's wilderness and what is not. Which is why I knew immediately that something was wrong. My patrol began on September 11th. I was assigned to the Thoroughfare District, a region of extreme remoteness at the southeastern edge of the park. The Thoroughfare is one of the most isolated areas in the lower 48 states. The nearest road is almost 30 miles away through rough terrain. The nearest town is more distant. Rangers typically patrol the area only twice in a season because the effort required to reach it is significant. I was doing an extended patrol, planning to spend 3 weeks documenting animal movements and checking the condition of remote trail systems. I had done this route before, multiple times. I knew it well. The first day of my patrol was standard. I hiked in via the Yellowstone River Trail, made camp at a high alpine basin, and spent the evening establishing my base camp and organizing my equipment. I was carrying supplies for 3 weeks. Dehydrated food, water purification, first aid, my satellite communicator, maps, and documentation equipment. I also carried bear spray, a knife, and a .44 Magnum revolver, which is standard for wilderness rangers in grizzly country. The weather forecast was favorable. The season was transitioning from summer to early fall, which meant cooler nights and lower tourism pressure in the park. My second day was routine. I conducted a systematic survey of the basin, looking for sign of recent animal activity. I found elk trails, some fresh, some older. I found bear scat, probably black bear, a few weeks old. I found predator kills, an elk calf killed by wolves or a lion, field dressed by scavengers, bones scattered. Everything was consistent with normal wildlife patterns for that location in that season. During that first survey day, I found tracks that seemed slightly wrong. Bear prints, they looked like. Big paw pad, claw marks, everything correct in terms of structure, but the track pattern was unusual. The distance between prints suggested an unusual gait. The pressure pattern suggested an unusual weight distribution. I noted it in my log but did not think much about it. Animals behave unpredictably sometimes. An injured animal would have an irregular gait. Detail mattered later. On my third day in the field, I began a systematic patrol of the eastern ridge system that overlooks the Thoroughfare Valley. This ridge is a migration route for large animals. I was looking for current sign, hoping to document what species were using the corridor and when. The ridge is high, almost 10,000 feet, and requires careful navigation because the terrain is steep and loose. I was moving slowly, stopping frequently to examine animal sign, taking photographs, making notes. At a saddle point between two peaks, I found something unusual. A pile of rocks, arranged deliberately. Not a natural formation, not a cairn that had been made by previous hikers, because this was deep enough in the backcountry that modern hikers rarely reached it. These rocks had been positioned carefully, in a circular pattern. The arrangement looked intentional, purposeful. I photographed it and made a note. Rock arrangements in the backcountry can indicate several things: old historical structures, trail markers from previous work crews, or natural formations that appear more deliberate than they are. But something about this arrangement bothered me. It looked too regular, too organized. When I reviewed my notes that evening at camp, I realized something. The rock arrangement was positioned on the most direct route through the saddle. If an animal were moving through that area, an arrangement like that could serve as a marker. Not something any animal would construct deliberately, of course, but something that might have been moved or arranged by the unusual gait animal I had tracked 2 days earlier. I made a note: unusual track pattern, rock arrangement on probable migration route, possible evidence of predator activity or animal injury affecting movement. That night I heard vocalizations. They came from a distance, maybe 2 miles south, echoing off the ridges. The sound was not identifiable to me immediately. It was not a wolf howl or a lion scream, not an elk bugle. Not any sound I could readily classify. It sounded like a call, but filtered through distance and echo. The actual characteristics were unclear. I checked my satellite communicator to verify that it was functional. It was. I made my twice-daily check-in with the park office and reported all observations. Normal wildlife activity, clear weather, no incidents. I did not report the unidentified vocalization because I could not describe it with confidence, and reporting unidentified sounds would flag my patrol as potentially problematic. On my fourth day I found more tracks. I was descending the ridge to return to my base camp when I noticed them in a sandy area where water ran off the ridge face. Multiple track sets, all recent. Elk, certainly. Bear, yes. And then those unusual gait prints again. Multiple sets of them, all moving in the same direction. All heading down the valley. I made detailed photographs and notes. The unusual tracks seemed to be following the elk trails. The gait pattern remained consistent across all the prints I examined. Whatever was making these tracks was large, probably heavy, and moving with an unusual weight distribution. Possibly an injured animal. Possibly a young or inexperienced animal. Possibly something wrong with a known species. I spent that evening reviewing my field manual, looking at track patterns for all the large predators and ungulates that occur in the park. I could not find a perfect match for the unusual prints I was documenting. The closest match was a black bear print, but the size was wrong, too large. The claw marks were in unusual positions. The overall structure did not match bear anatomy. I considered briefly the possibility that I was misidentifying elk or deer prints, that the unusual gait was actually normal and I was not seeing it correctly, that my expectations were affecting my interpretation. But I have identified animal tracks for 19 years. I know what I was seeing. On my 5th day, the vocalizations returned, but this time they came from a much closer distance, less than a mile away. The sound was more distinct, but still not identifiable. It was a call, definitely, complex, with harmonic qualities that suggested deliberate vocalization rather than an instinctive sound, almost like something was practicing speech patterns. I began to feel genuine concern, not fear, exactly, concern. Something about the escalation pattern was wrong. The animal was getting closer. The vocalizations were becoming more frequent. The tracks were multiplying. I considered the possibilities. A problem bear that was habituated to human food. But I had seen no evidence of that. No trash, no campsites being approached. No sign of aggressive behavior toward humans. A predator marking territory, possibly. That would explain the markers and the vocalizations. But the track pattern did not fit any known predator in Yellowstone. An animal with a medical issue, some kind of injury or neurological problem, possible. But injuries would show in track patterns in specific ways, and the tracks I was seeing were consistent and regular, suggesting normal function despite the unusual gait. I made a decision that was in retrospect not a good one. I decided to locate the animal directly, to approach it, observe it, and document what it was. I told myself this was part of my job. I was supposed to report on wildlife behavior and document animals in my district. I did not tell myself that I was also driven by curiosity, by the puzzle of an unidentified animal, by the desire to solve the mystery before seeking outside help. On my 6th day, I deliberately followed the tracks. The tracks led down the ridge into a forested drainage. The forest at that elevation is whitebark pine and subalpine fir, with considerable undergrowth and fallen trees. Visibility was limited. The drainage led to the valley floor, where I knew from my maps there was a stream and more dense forest. I followed the tracks carefully. The animal had moved along game trails, following established routes. But the tracks were not in the oldest trail. They were in a secondary trail, one that paralleled the main trail but stayed slightly apart. As if the animal was moving near the established corridor but choosing not to use it directly. The trail led deeper into the forest. As I descended, the forest became denser. I had to move more slowly, watching for fallen trees and obstacles. The tracks remained clear in the soft ground of the forest floor. Recent. The scat I found indicated the animal had passed through within the last 12 hours. I followed the tracks for approximately 3 hours, covering maybe 3 miles. The trail led to the stream where it stopped. At the stream bank, the tracks diverged. Some continued along the bank heading upstream. Others crossed the stream and disappeared into the forest on the far side. I did not cross. I stopped at the stream bank and assessed the situation. I had been following a trail for hours with no direct observation of the animal. The animal had not shown any signs of fleeing from my pursuit. The trail pattern suggested that the animal was aware I was there, that it was allowing me to follow, that it was monitoring my progress. That realization changed something for me. I was not tracking an animal that was unaware of my presence. I was being guided by an animal that had deliberately left a trail for me to follow. I returned to my camp and made an official log entry that night. I reported that I had found evidence of an unidentified large animal showing unusual behavior. I stated that I was going to conduct additional observation and documentation before making a formal report. I did not report the details, the unusual gait, the vocalizations, the arranged markers. That would have triggered a protocol response from the park office, possible extraction, and involvement of other rangers or specialists. I wanted to solve this myself first. That night I heard the vocalizations again. They came from multiple directions simultaneously. This time there were multiple voices, at least 3, maybe more. They called in sequence like they were communicating with each other. The sounds had patterns that seemed to echo and respond to each other, not mindless animal calls, coordinated vocalization. I did not sleep well that night. On my 7th day I found the structure. I had decided to explore more carefully around my base camp, looking for evidence I might have missed. Near a stand of old whitebark pines, approximately half a mile from my camp, I found a shelter. It was constructed from pine branches and saplings, arranged in a framework that was roughly 6 feet long and 4 feet high. The framework was covered with bark and insulated with moss and dried grass. It was primitive, but the construction showed deliberate planning. Someone, or something, had gathered specific materials and assembled them into a functional shelter. I did not construct that shelter. No one else had been in this region for weeks. I had checked the ranger log for the thoroughfare district. The last patrol before mine had been 3 months earlier. I photographed the shelter extensively. I measured it. I documented the materials used and the construction technique. This was evidence of something that could construct tools or shelters. This was evidence of cognition that went beyond normal animal behavior. I was frightened now. Not panicked, but genuinely frightened. Because everything I was documenting pointed to something that should not exist. Something that was more intelligent than the animals I knew. Something that could construct shelters, make intentional markers, and communicate with others of its kind using complex vocalizations. That evening I made a mistake. I decided to leave a message in the shelter. I left a protein bar and a note, written in simple language, asking the animal to identify itself. I knew it was foolish. I knew that an animal would not read a note or understand a message, but I did it anyway. Because I needed to believe that whatever this was, it could communicate, that there was some possibility of understanding. When I returned to the shelter the next morning, the protein bar was gone. The note was still there, but it had been carefully removed and placed beside the shelter, as if something had looked at it, determined it was not food, and set it aside. That was when I knew with absolute certainty that I was dealing with something intelligent. Something aware of human artifacts and human communication. On my 9th day in the field, I found the animal's territory. I had decided to explore further upstream from where I had abandoned my pursuit days earlier. The forest there was old and dense, with massive trees and a thick understory. I was moving slowly through the forest, not following any trail, simply observing, when I found the first boundary marker. It was a pine tree, approximately 40 feet high, with the bark deliberately stripped in a specific pattern. The stripping was fresh, probably within the last few days. The pattern was too regular to be natural damage. It was an intentional mark, a territorial marker. I found more markers as I continued deeper into the forest. Stripped trees, branches arranged in specific patterns. Scat piles positioned at regular intervals along a trail that was invisible until you were directly in it. All of these markers combined to indicate territory, to declare that this area belonged to something. I was walking through the territory of whatever I was pursuing. And the deeper I went, the more markers I found. The animal was defining its space, demonstrating ownership, establishing dominance. And then I found the camp. It was not a camp in any conventional sense, but it was a place where the animal spent significant time. The area was a sheltered clearing beside a stream, with a rock face providing natural protection from weather. There were multiple structures, several shelters similar to the one I had found before, but larger and more sophisticated. There was a fire pit, stones arranged in a circle, with ash in the center. The animal used fire. I stood at the edge of that clearing for a very long time, trying to process what I was seeing. The structures suggested intelligence. The fire pit suggested technology. The territorial markers suggested social organization. Everything I was observing pointed to something that was not simply an animal. I documented everything with photographs. I took detailed notes. I collected samples, hair from the shelters, ashes from the fire pit, scat specimens, and then I made an error in judgment. I called out. I stood at the edge of the clearing and shouted into the forest, asking if anyone was there, if anything could hear me. I know how foolish that was. I know that it was a moment of panic, of instinctive behavior overriding my judgment. The response came immediately. A vocalization from multiple directions, the same coordinated calling I had heard before. But this time it was closer, much closer. The voices surrounded me on 3 sides. I backed away from the clearing slowly. I did not run. Running would trigger a chase response. I moved backward, maintaining visual awareness of the forest, until I felt I was a safe distance away. Then I turned and walked back toward my camp, moving quickly but controlled. I did not hear the vocalizations follow me, but I felt the presence. I knew I was being tracked. I knew I was being observed, and I knew that whatever was in those woods had decided to reveal itself to me. That night I made a decision. I used my satellite communicator to request extraction from the field. I reported that I was experiencing a medical issue, knee pain from an old injury that was becoming problematic in the remote terrain. I requested that I be picked up the next day from an emergency landing zone approximately 5 miles from my camp. The park office approved the extraction. I packed my camp early the next morning. I collected all my documentation, all my samples, all my evidence. I prepared to leave the thoroughfare, but before I departed I went back to the animal's territory. I knew it was risky. I knew I should just leave, but I needed to try one more time to communicate, to leave something that might bridge the gap between what I was and what it was. I left my knife, a quality field knife with a bone handle. I left it in the center of the fire pit in the clearing, placed deliberately with the blade clean and the handle pointing toward where I had been standing. I left a message in the sand, spelled out in small stones. The message said, "I will not come back. You are safe from me." I do not know if anything I left was understood, but it made me feel better to try. The helicopter extraction happened on schedule. I was picked up from the emergency zone, flown out of the thoroughfare, and returned to park headquarters within 4 hours. The pilot did not ask questions. Extraction requests from rangers in the field were handled routinely. I spent the next 3 days at the ranger station, filing reports and decompressing from the field expedition. I submitted my official patrol report, describing the wildlife observations I had made, the condition of the trail systems, and the animal tracks that suggested an unusual predator in the region. I did not mention the shelters. I did not mention the fire pit. I did not mention the territorial markers or the coordinated vocalizations or the organized structures. I described an unusual predator with an irregular gait and suggested that a specialist should be brought in to investigate what the animal might be. My supervisor, a woman named Catherine Reeves who had been with the park for 25 years, read the report and asked me to come to her office. "This is detailed documentation of anomalous animal behavior," she said, "but it is not detailed enough. If you are suggesting that there is an undocumented animal in the thoroughfare, I need more than unusual tracks and a strange gait." I did not know what to say. I could not tell her about the shelters. If I did, she would think I was experiencing psychological breakdown. The park has protocols for rangers who experience trauma in the field. I would be evaluated. My judgment would be questioned. My career would be affected. "I am confident in my observations," I said carefully. "But I think the situation requires further investigation by someone with expertise in unusual wildlife behavior." Catherine studied me for a long moment. "David, I have known you for a long time. I trust your competence, but in 19 years you have never reported anything like this. What changed during this patrol?" "I found something I could not explain," I said. Catherine closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something in her expression that suggested she understood more than I had said. "There are things in those mountains that we do not have good explanations for," she said quietly. "There have always been things that do not fit into the categories we use for known animals. Most rangers who encounter them learn to observe silently and document nothing. They understand that there are limits to what the Park Service can officially acknowledge." I realized in that moment that Catherine knew. She knew there was something unusual in the thoroughfare. She had probably encountered it herself or knew other rangers who had. She was giving me permission to stop reporting on it, to let it remain officially undocumented. "I understand," I said. "Good. Then we can close this report, file it away, and move forward." But I did not move forward. Not really. That patrol changed something fundamental in my perception of Yellowstone. I returned to patrol work 6 weeks later. I have continued to work as a ranger for the park, but I have not gone back into the thoroughfare alone. I have not conducted extended solo patrols in the remote regions. I have requested assignments in the more populated areas where other rangers are within radio distance. I have arranged my schedule so that I rarely work in actual isolation. The park office has not objected to these requests. Catherine said nothing about my altered patrol patterns. Over the years that have passed since that expedition, I have encountered other rangers who show signs of having discovered something unusual in the backcountry. They do not speak about it openly, but there is a recognition between us, a nod, an understanding that we have all encountered something that cannot be explained through conventional wildlife knowledge. I still occasionally find tracks in the snow when I work the northern districts. The unusual gait is recognizable. The animal is still there, but it stays away from my patrol routes now. It keeps distance. The intelligent behavior that was demonstrated during my time in the thoroughfare has been applied to avoidance of human contact. Sometimes I think about the knife I left in the fire pit. I wonder if it is still there. I wonder if whatever took shelter in that clearing understands what I meant by leaving it. If it understood that I was acknowledging the intelligence it demonstrated, that I was offering respect to something that existed in its own world, separate from ours. There are members of the Ranger Service and Park Administration who know more than I do about what inhabits the remote regions of Yellowstone. They know what it is because they have seen it more clearly than I have. They know its behavior patterns and its habitat preferences and why it has learned not to interact directly with humans. They are not willing to discuss this publicly. The impact on the park's management, on tourism, on scientific understanding would be significant if it became widely known that there were large, intelligent creatures in the backcountry that could not be classified into any known category. So we maintain the fiction, we patrol. We document normal wildlife, we file reports that describe expected behavior, and we keep the knowledge of what really inhabits those mountains to ourselves. The channel membership archive contains my field notes and photographic documentation from that patrol. The images are there, unfiltered and unedited. The tracks are visible, the structures are documented, the evidence is available for anyone who wants to review it and reach their own conclusions. I am not the only ranger who has encountered something unusual in Yellowstone. There are others. Some of them have left the service because they could not reconcile what they experienced with the official narrative of the park. Others, like me, have continued, but changed their behavior and their patrol patterns. We have all made the same decision. We have chosen to leave it alone, and it has chosen to leave us alone. But I still drive past the turnoff to the thoroughfare trail sometimes, when I am working that region. I never take it, I never go back, because I understand now that there are some mysteries that should remain unsolved. Some things that should remain undocumented. some creatures that deserve to exist in the wild places without human interference or study or categorization. I left that territory with a deeper understanding of wilderness than I had before. I learned that we do not truly know our own parks. We do not have as complete an understanding of what lives in the remote places as we believe we do. And there are creatures in Yellowstone that have learned to hide themselves so effectively that only the most careful observers will ever know they are there. The knife I left remains my only gift to whatever I encountered. A small gesture of respect from one intelligent being to another. A recognition that there is more in those mountains than what appears on our maps or in our official reports. More than what can be explained. More than what we are willing to acknowledge. And that is the truth I learned during those 3 weeks alone in the thoroughfare. That knowledge. I have not filed a visitor incident report in 3 years. Not because nothing has happened, because what happened does not fit into any category the National Park Service has prepared a form for. The other rangers know why I stopped reporting. They do not ask questions about it. Which means they have encountered it too. My name is Thomas Brennan, and I have been a full-time ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington State for 17 years. Before I explain what I experienced during a routine patrol in the Hoh Rainforest in early October, subscribe and share this with someone who spends time in national parks and thinks they understand what is normal in those places. I started working for the National Park Service right after college, initially at Mount Rainier as a seasonal ranger. Mount Rainier broke me into the reality of wilderness work, the physical demands, the unpredictable weather, the genuine dangers of alpine terrain. After 4 seasons there, I transferred to Olympic as a permanent position. Olympic National Park is larger than Mount Rainier in some respects but quieter, less dramatic in obvious ways. The mountains are not as high, the weather is more complicated, more variable. But the real challenge at Olympic is the forest itself. The temperate rainforest on the western side of the park is ancient, dense, and isolating in ways that high mountains never are. I have spent 17 years patrolling those forests. I know the Hoh Rainforest system better than I know my own neighborhood. I know the trails, the water crossings, the wildlife patterns, the seasonal changes. I know where the deep moss grows so thick it swallows your footsteps. I know which creeks are dangerous to ford in winter and which are always passable. I know the places where lost hikers have been found and the places where lost hikers have never been found. I know this forest the way someone knows the layout of their own home. Which is why I noticed when something changed. The season was transitioning from late summer to early fall. The park was still receiving significant visitor traffic, though it was declining from the peak season. My primary responsibility was monitoring the main trail systems and campgrounds, ensuring visitor safety and that the infrastructure was in acceptable condition. The Hoh River Trail is one of the most popular routes in the park, an 11-mile round trip to a glacier observation area. It is well maintained, well marked, and populated enough that serious emergencies are rare. I also maintained secondary trail systems that saw fewer hikers. The Dos Wallops area in particular receives limited traffic because of distance and difficulty reaching it. Those remote sections are where I do most of my actual work, maintaining trail markers, clearing debris, surveying for wildlife impact, documenting plant health. The work is methodical, routine, deeply familiar. Early October brought the first significant rain of the season. The rainforest receives an enormous amount of precipitation annually. Olympic gets nearly 150 inches per year on the western slope. But early autumn storms bring weather that is different from the misty drizzle of most seasons. These are sharp-edged storms, fast-moving systems that cause rapid creek swelling and trail washouts. I began my patrol anticipating that I would find damage. What I found instead was evidence of something else. On my first day patrolling the Dos Wallops secondary system, I discovered that several trail markers had been moved. Not knocked down by storm or weather, moved. Trail markers at Olympic are standardized, aluminum diamonds nailed to trees at regular intervals along the routes. They are positioned at specific heights and specific distances, as much from tradition as from function. The markers I found on my first day had been relocated. Some moved upslope from where they should have been. Some moved downslope. The pattern suggested deliberate repositioning. I photographed the displaced markers and made notes. Weather could move objects in some scenarios, but not consistently in a pattern that suggested intentional placement. Vandalism was possible. I had dealt with pranksters and people deliberately moving markers to create confusion in the past. But the repositioning on this particular route was too subtle for that. It did not seem designed to confuse hikers. It seemed designed to create a specific route variation. I spent that evening at my field cabin in the Hoff area, reviewing maps and notes. The displaced markers, if followed sequentially, would lead a hiker away from the established trail and into a specific drainage area, a place that was not on most park maps because it was too remote for regular recreational use. a place that I had hiked to only twice in my 17 years at Olympic. I made a note and moved forward with my patrol schedule. The next day I found more anomalies. Blazes, slashes cut into tree bark to mark trail routes in areas where markers are not practical, had been added to trees along a secondary route that paralleled the main trail system. The blazes were fresh, made within the last few days. They were cut professionally, not by random vandals. They used the standard patterns that only official rangers or someone trained in park protocol would know. But I did not make those blazes, no other ranger had reported working that area, and the blazes did not appear in my daily work assignments. I reported the blazes to my supervisor, Richard Kessler, who had managed the Ho district for 12 years. Richard came out and examined them with me. We walked the route they indicated. It led to a clearing near Ho Lake, a remote area that was not part of established hiking routes. "This is strange," Richard said, examining the blaze marks with a magnifying glass. "These are definitely official work, but I do not have any record of anyone doing this. Could you have forgotten?" "No," I said. "I would remember cutting new blazes. It is something I track in my daily log." Richard was quiet for a moment, studying the blazes. "Then we have a problem. Either someone is doing unauthorized trail work in the park, or someone is forging ranger work. Neither option is good." He reported it up the administrative chain, and we expected an investigation. But investigation by park administration moves slowly. It would take weeks before anyone from the main office came out to investigate. In the meantime, I continued my patrol. The third day of my patrol brought a different kind of anomaly. I was hiking the Ho River Trail during mid-afternoon, checking the condition of the main bridges and observing visitor behavior. The trail was moderately busy with hikers, couples and small groups heading to the glacier view. I was conducting a routine observation, walking against the flow of traffic so I could see people's faces, assess if anyone looked lost or distressed. Near mile 7 of the trail, I encountered a family of 5, 2 adults and 3 children. They were moving slowly, stopping frequently to examine plants and animals. The father was explaining something to the children, pointing to a moss-covered log. Everything about the interaction suggested normal, engaged tourists, but something about the scene bothered me. I slowed my pace and observed them more carefully. The father was explaining the decomposition cycle, how a fallen tree becomes habitat for new growth. Perfectly appropriate park education, but he was using specific technical terminology: succession ecology, coarse woody debris, fungal networks. The kinds of terms you would not expect a tourist to use casually with children. The level of detail suggested professional knowledge. More specifically, it suggested ranger training. I was probably seeing patterns that were not there. But when I returned to the ranger station that evening, I checked the visitor log. The family was registered to a cabin at the Ho campground. The registration was current and standard, but I did not recognize them. And in 17 years I usually recognized repeat visitors or people who fit the pattern of serious nature enthusiasts. That evening I documented the encounters in my personal journal. Displaced trail markers, unauthorized blazes, the unusual family on the trail. I was not yet concerned enough to file official reports. These were anomalies, but not emergencies. They could all have innocent explanations, but they were building a pattern. The next day brought weather that confined me to the ranger station. Heavy rain, wind gusts above 30 miles per hour, and creek water rising dangerously. I spent the day doing indoor work, equipment maintenance, report filing, data entry. It was dull work but necessary. The kind of work that every ranger hates and every ranger eventually learns to accept. By evening the rain had diminished enough that I felt comfortable driving back out to the field for evening surveys. I wanted to check on water levels at the main trail crossings and verify that the heavy rain had not created immediate hazards. The drive to the Ho trailhead took approximately 40 minutes through winding forest roads. As I approached the trailhead parking area, I noticed something unusual. A vehicle was parked in the lot, a forest green pickup truck with no identifying markings. Not a private vehicle. Not a Park Service vehicle. Something in between. The truck was empty, the interior dark. No one was inside waiting. I documented the truck's presence and made a note of the license plate. Then I proceeded to the trail to conduct my evening surveys. The trail was empty of hikers. The weather was marginal enough that recreational visitors had stayed away. The creek crossings were high but passable. I documented the conditions and turned back toward the trailhead. It was approximately 6:15 p.m. when I arrived back at the parking area. The green truck was gone. I have worked 17 years in national parks. I have seen vehicle thefts, abandoned cars, poaching operations caught mid-action, but I have never seen a vehicle simply appear and disappear without explanation. I made note of the incident and contacted Richard. "A green pickup," Richard said over the radio. "Did you get a clear plate?" I read him the plate number. Run it through my end, he said. Let me see if it registers to anyone. I did a quick check through the ranger station database. The plate did not appear in any standard registry, not rental agencies, not federal vehicle fleets, not park service databases. The plate was either fabricated or belonged to something outside normal systems. That is odd, Richard said when I reported back. I would suggest not engaging with whoever owns that vehicle if you encounter them again. File a formal incident report and note the vehicle description. I will escalate it through the administrative office. For the first time I felt genuine concern. The incidents were escalating in specificity. Someone was moving trail markers with purpose. Someone was creating unauthorized blazes. Someone was operating in the park with vehicles bearing unknown plates. This was not random vandalism or coincidental anomalies. This was coordinated activity. I filed the incident report that evening and submitted it through official channels. The administrative response came back within 2 days. I received a call from a supervisor I did not know, a woman named Patricia Vasquez who worked at the park's main office. She was polite, professional, and thorough in her questions. These incidents you reported, she said. Have you observed any direct contact with the individuals involved? Any confrontation or threatening behavior? No direct contact, I said. Just evidence that they have been present and active. Are you certain the trail markers and blazes were not made by another ranger? Could there be any confusion about work assignments? I checked with Richard and reviewed the work logs. No one was assigned to that area during the time frame when the markers were displaced. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I am going to put this matter into active investigation status. I would like you to continue your regular patrol work, but I would also like you to maintain especially careful documentation of any further anomalies. Photographs, times, locations, and detailed notes. Everything should be forwarded to my office directly. Is there a security concern? I asked. There may be, Patricia said carefully. We want to gather more information before determining what we are dealing with. In the meantime, I would ask that you not discuss these incidents with other rangers or visitors. This is now part of an official investigation, and we prefer to minimize information distribution until we have a clearer picture. I agreed to the terms and ended the call. The fact that she wanted information isolated to her office suggested that this was not a routine vandalism investigation. This was something bigger, and the park administration knew it. Over the next week I maintained my patrol schedule while being hyper-aware of anything unusual. The weather improved, and visitor numbers increased slightly as people took advantage of the clearing conditions. I conducted my routine inspections of trails, campgrounds, and facilities. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but the anomalies continued. On day 12 of my patrol period, I found a shelter. I was walking the secondary system near Hawk Lake when I discovered a small structure built against a ridge face. The structure was made from fallen branches and bark, arranged in a framework that was clearly deliberate construction. It was small, approximately 5 feet by 3 feet, but sturdy. Someone had invested time and effort into building a shelter in a location that was miles from any established trail. The shelter contained materials, a blanket, canned food, a notebook. The notebook had entries in it, dated over the past 3 weeks. I did not read the entries completely, but the handwriting was neat, the entries structured. Someone was maintaining a camp in the park's remote territory. I photographed everything and did not disturb the contents, but I documented the GPS location and noted everything in my field log. When I reported this to Patricia, her response was immediate and direct. Do not return to that location, she said. Do not attempt to retrieve anything from the shelter. Continue your normal patrol routine, but avoid that specific area. If you encounter anyone in that area, observe from a distance and report the encounter. Do not make contact. Are we talking about a criminal situation? I asked. We are still determining the nature of the situation, Patricia said carefully. I will say this, Thomas. There are things in that park that we do not publicize, things that we monitor, and sometimes those things require specific management protocols. Your job is to observe and report, not to investigate. The implication was clear. Whatever was happening in Olympic National Park, the administration knew about it. They were not surprised by the evidence I was finding. They were expecting it. I followed Patricia's instructions and avoided the shelter area. But the knowledge that it existed, that someone or something was maintaining a camp in the remote forest, changed my entire understanding of what I was patrolling. Over the next 5 days I documented additional anomalies, more displaced trail markers, additional unauthorized blazes, fresh tracks in muddy areas that did not match any standard animal pattern, fresh scat piles positioned at regular intervals along forest routes, food caches hidden in trees, all evidence that something was establishing presence and territory in the park. The markers and blazes seemed to be creating a network of alternate routes through the forest. If you followed them sequentially, they would lead from the main trails into the deep forest, toward the shelter area. Toward something. On day 19 I encountered a direct warning. I was patrolling the Ho River Trail during mid-morning. The weather was clear, the trail busy with visitors. I was moving through a section of particularly dense forest when I encountered an elderly woman sitting on a bench. She was dressed for the trail, good hiking boots, appropriate layering, but she appeared to be resting. She was alone. I always stop to check on solo hikers who are sitting still on the trail. It is basic ranger protocol. I approached and asked if she was okay, if she needed assistance. "I am fine," she said. She had a strong accent that I could not immediately place. "I am just resting, enjoying the forest." I made standard conversation, asking where she was from, if she was enjoying the park. She answered vaguely. But as I was preparing to move on, she said something that stopped me. "You should not go further into the forest," she said. "There are things in there that are not meant to be found, things that prefer to remain hidden." I asked her what she meant. She smiled, but there was something in the smile that was not friendly. "You are a ranger," she said. "You already know. You have been finding the signs, the markers, the shelters. You know something is in the forest. Something is establishing presence. That is not random. That is intentional. Someone or something is leaving signs deliberately, for a reason." "Who are you?" I asked. "I am just a visitor," she said. "Just someone who likes to spend time in the forest. I would suggest you respect the forest, and respect what lives in it. Your administration already knows. That is why they told you not to investigate further." I asked her name. She stood up, gathered her backpack, and began walking back down the trail toward the trailhead. I did not follow, but I documented the encounter in detail, and reported it directly to Patricia. The response came back within hours. "I need you to come into the main office," Patricia said. "We need to have a detailed conversation about what you have experienced and what you have observed. This situation is more serious than I initially communicated." I arranged for another ranger to cover my patrol area and drove to the main park office the next morning. Patricia's office was in the administrative building at the park's main entrance. She was in her late 40s, professional, and she demonstrated clear knowledge about the incidents I had reported. She had my complete documentation in front of her, all the photographs, notes, and observations. "How much do you know about the history of Olympic National Park?" she asked. "The basics," I said. "It was established in 1938. It preserves temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and coastal areas. It is home to indigenous peoples and protected wildlife." "All true," Patricia said. "But there are layers of history that are not emphasized in the official park materials. The rainforest in particular has characteristics that are unusual. The isolation, the depth of the forest, the density of the old growth. It creates an environment where things can exist without easy detection." "Things," I repeated. "We do not have an official classification," Patricia said. "But Olympic has always reported a higher rate of unusual incidents than comparable national parks. Missing hikers with no clear cause. Instances of disorientation in areas that should be straightforward navigation. Equipment failures that cannot be explained through mechanical means. Visitor reports of encounters with things that do not match known animals. For decades, these incidents were documented quietly, classified as unexplained, and filed away." "And now?" I asked. "About 5 years ago," Patricia said, "we began to notice a pattern shift. The incidents were becoming more organized, less random. The evidence suggested that something, or multiple somethings, was establishing territory markers, creating routes, setting up camps, coordinating activity in a way that suggested planning and intelligence." I sat back, processing the implication. "Are you suggesting that there are intelligent entities in the Olympic forest? Humanoid creatures or something similar?" "I am suggesting," Patricia said carefully, "that we have evidence of organized behavior that we cannot classify into any known category. The administration's response has been to monitor the situation closely while maintaining public normality. We do not want to cause panic or attract external attention. The forest must remain accessible to visitors while we try to understand what is occurring." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to continue your patrol work," Patricia said. "But I want you to be extremely careful. Do not attempt to make contact. Do not investigate the shelters or camps. If you encounter anything unusual, document it and report it. That is all. Your job is observation, not intervention." I left that meeting with a completely changed understanding of my position as a ranger. I was not simply maintaining trails and monitoring visitor safety. I was also a surveillance asset for something that the park administration was trying to understand while keeping it hidden from the public. For the remainder of the fall season, I conducted my patrols with this knowledge. I observed carefully. I documented everything. and I began to understand that the markers, the blazes, the shelters, and the staged encounters were all forms of communication. Something in the forest was trying to establish contact with the park administration. It was doing so through deliberate signs and planned encounters. On October 30th, near the end of my patrol period, I encountered something directly. I was walking a secondary route that paralleled the Hoh River when I found fresh tracks in the mud beside a creek crossing. The tracks were bipedal, two-legged, and were far too large to be human. The prints showed significant weight, deep impression, and a gait pattern that suggested something walking with conscious intent, not animal movement. I followed the tracks for approximately 100 meters before I realized I was being deliberately led. The trail was too perfect, too easy to follow, as if something wanted to ensure I could track it. The tracks led to a clearing where I found another shelter, similar to the previous one but larger. This shelter had a fire pit, stones arranged in a circle with ash inside. Something in the forest knew how to make fire. Something was using controlled burns. Something was establishing infrastructure. I documented the location and was preparing to leave when I heard a sound behind me, a vocalization, low and resonant, not an animal sound, not anything from any creature in the Pacific Northwest. It was almost like someone trying to speak, but filtered through something not quite human, like learning the shape of language without fully understanding it. I turned slowly to face the direction of the sound. I did not see anything. The forest was dense, shadowed, but I felt the presence. Something was there, approximately 30 meters away, observing me, studying me. I did not move. The vocalization came again, the same pattern, repeated, almost like a test, like something was practicing communication. Then it stopped. The presence retreated. I felt it withdraw into the forest. I left the area and made my way back to the ranger station. The final report I filed to Patricia detailed everything. The tracks, the shelter, the direct encounter. Her response was to remove me from patrol status for 2 weeks, pending administrative review. When I returned to work, the investigation had shifted. External specialists had begun working with park administration. I saw people I did not recognize, people with equipment that looked military in nature, conducting surveys in the remote forest areas. The official story was that Olympic was conducting a comprehensive wildlife census. The truth I understood was that the park administration had decided to take more active steps to understand and potentially contain whatever was in the forest. The season changed. Winter came. The forest became quiet in the way that rainforests become quiet in winter, not silent but muted. The visitor numbers dropped dramatically. The tourism infrastructure went into its off-season routine. The incidents stopped. No more displaced trail markers. No more unauthorized blazes. No more shelters or evidence of continued occupation. It was as if whatever had been active in the forest had chosen to retreat, to become less visible. I have continued to work at Olympic as a ranger. I have conducted many more patrols. I have encountered no further direct anomalies, though occasionally I find evidence that something remains in the deep forest. Fresh tracks, organized structures, fire pits with careful ash management. Patricia retired 2 years ago and moved out of state. She never officially debriefed me about the investigation's findings. Before she left, she told me one thing. What you encountered in that forest is still there, she said. It has just learned to hide itself more effectively. It understood that direct contact was causing problems, so it adapted. It became less visible. It learned to coexist with human activity by simply not being observed. That kind of learning suggests a level of intelligence and self-awareness that we do not have adequate language to describe. 3 years have passed since I filed those incident reports. I have not filed any additional reports about strange activity. Other rangers have asked me about the unusual incidents in hushed conversations. I have given them the same answer every time. I do not file reports about things I cannot classify, I tell them, and I suggest you do the same. Olympic National Park continues to operate normally. Thousands of visitors hike the trails every year. They enjoy the forest, experience its beauty, and leave without knowing that they are moving through a landscape that is monitored constantly. A landscape where something exists that we cannot understand or categorize. Something that has learned to manage its interaction with human civilization by remaining hidden. I still patrol those forests. I still maintain the trails and care for the park. But I do so with the knowledge that I am sharing that space with intelligence that chose not to remain hidden, and then chose to hide again when that revelation became inconvenient. For anyone working in national parks, for anyone spending significant time in remote wilderness, there are things you may encounter that do not fit into standard frameworks, things that do not match known animals, things that show signs of organization and intelligence. If you encounter them, my advice is the same as Patricia's advice to me. Document carefully, report to appropriate authorities, and then let it go, because some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some creatures are meant to remain undiscovered. The channel's membership archive contains my complete documentation from the 2023 patrol season, including photographs of the displaced markers, the unauthorized blazes, and the shelter structures. For anyone interested in reviewing the primary source material, that archive is available to members who want to examine the evidence in detail. I am still a ranger at Olympic National Park. I still walk those forests, and I still understand that I am not alone there. That understanding has changed everything about how I move through that landscape. It has made me more careful, more respectful, more aware that the wilderness is not simply a place of recreation for humans, it is a place of actual habitation. And sometimes what inhabits it is watching the humans who pass through with the same careful attention that we watch it. The forest is patient, the forest is present, and the forest, it seems, has learned how to be invisible. The team will not return to the Stafford house. Not because we are afraid, though we are. Not because the activity has stopped, though it has. We will not return because something in that house made a choice about us, and that choice was not to let us leave until we understood what it wanted. And what it wanted was far worse than any ghost story we have encountered in 15 years of paranormal investigation. My name is Michael Hayes, and I run a paranormal investigation team called Spirit Walk. We have been documenting unexplained activity in supposedly haunted locations across the United States for the past 15 years. Before I explain what happened during our investigation of the Stafford house in Harlan County, Kentucky, like this video. Subscribe and share this with someone who thinks they understand how hauntings work based on what they have seen on television. I started Spirit Walk in 2008 as a hobby, just me and a camera, investigating local reports of paranormal activity. I was skeptical then and I remain skeptical now. The difference is that skepticism has been tempered by evidence. I have recorded phenomena that cannot be explained through conventional means. I have documented things that do not fit into logical frameworks. I have learned that the world contains mysteries that science has not yet categorized. But I have also learned that most hauntings have explainable causes. Environmental factors create sounds that people interpret as paranormal. Old houses settle and creak. Infrasound below human hearing range creates feelings of dread and unease. Carbon monoxide poisoning causes hallucinations. Mold produces toxins that create psychological disturbance. Most of what people interpret as supernatural activity has mundane origins. The Stafford house was different. The house itself was built in 1887, a large Victorian structure in Harlan County, approximately 3 miles outside the main town. It had been occupied continuously for over 100 years, then abandoned roughly 30 years ago. The current owner, a man named Thomas Stafford, had inherited the house from his mother and decided to open it for paranormal investigation tours. He had contacted us after reading about some of our previous work. Thomas described the house as experiencing constant activity, footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing on their own, disembodied voices, objects moving without explanation. He said that previous investigation teams had documented activity, but had declined to return for follow-up work. He wanted an experienced team to conduct a thorough investigation and provide documentation that he could use for promotional purposes. Our team consisted of myself, the lead investigator, Emma Rodriguez, our audio and equipment specialist, Marcus Chen, our videographer and tech manager, and David Williams, a sensory analyst who had trained in architecture and building physics. Between us we had approximately 300 documented investigations. We had seen plenty of odd phenomena. We had also debunked plenty of claims. I approached the Stafford house investigation with my standard skeptical framework. We would spend 5 days on site, conducting systematic investigations of different areas. We would document environmental factors, temperature, humidity, electromagnetic fields, air movement patterns. We would place cameras in high-activity areas. We would conduct audio recordings. We would interview the homeowner about the history of the house and his personal experiences. And at the end we would analyze everything and draw evidence-based conclusions about what was happening. What we found instead was a house that actively resisted our investigation, and something in that house that understood exactly how to manipulate people who claimed to be experts at finding the truth. We arrived at the Stafford house on a Friday evening in early June. The weather was clear, warm, with no forecast for storms or atmospheric disturbances that could create unusual sounds or environmental effects. The house itself was in a state of careful neglect, maintained but not actively lived in. Electricity was running, which Thomas had arranged. Water was accessible. The structure itself appeared sound, no obvious decay or deterioration. Thomas gave us a tour of the property. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a large parlor on the main floor, a library, a dining room and a kitchen, a basement, an attic accessed by a narrow staircase. Approximately 4,500 square feet of interior space. The house was furnished in period-appropriate but worn furniture. Photographs of the Stafford family lined the walls. Decades of accumulated dust covered most surfaces. My family lived here for most of the 20th century, Thomas said as he led us through the rooms. My grandfather built the house. My mother lived here until she moved to assisted living about 10 years ago. She said the house was always active. Always had sounds and movements that were not explicable. She grew up with it. For her it was just normal. Did she ever report feeling threatened? I asked. She said the house had moods, Thomas said. Some days it seemed quiet and peaceful. Other days it felt angry. She learned to respect that. She said you did not argue with the house. You accepted what it wanted. That comment struck me as notable. Not because it suggested supernatural activity, but because it suggested a psychological pattern. Someone who had lived alone in an old house for decades might develop a relationship with the space itself. That person might interpret ordinary house sounds as intentional communication. That person might pass that framework to their children. Has anything actually happened since your mother left? I asked. Constantly, Thomas said. I can give you examples. But I think it is better if you experience it yourselves. We set up our equipment over the course of the evening. We placed motion-activated cameras in the main hallway, both bedrooms and the basement. We set up audio recorders in areas that Thomas described as particularly active. We placed electromagnetic field detectors in multiple locations. We established a base station in the parlor where we could monitor live feeds from all cameras and receive audio input. By 11 p.m. we were ready to begin our formal investigation. We divided into 2 teams. Emma and I would conduct a systematic walkthrough of the house, documenting environmental conditions and baseline readings. Marcus and David would remain at the base station, monitoring equipment and providing communication. The house felt different after dark. I am aware that this is psychological. The absence of sunlight creates different atmospheric conditions, and humans perceive enclosed spaces differently in darkness. But objectively, the house felt heavier, more present. The air seemed thicker. Emma and I moved through the ground floor systematically, documenting temperature in each room, electromagnetic field readings, humidity levels. Everything was baseline, nothing unusual. The house was old but functionally normal. As we moved into the second floor, Marcus came through our earpieces. We are getting audio anomalies, he said. Nothing visual on the cameras yet, but the audio recorders in the hallway are picking up something. Sounds like movement, like something dragging across the floor. We paused and listened. The hallway was silent to our ears. But the recording equipment, more sensitive than human hearing, was detecting something. Where specifically? I asked. The north hallway, Marcus said. Near the third bedroom. It is intermittent, starts and stops. Emma and I moved toward the third bedroom. As we approached, I felt a temperature change. The hallway seemed noticeably cooler than the areas we had just been in. My thermometer confirmed it, a 7-degree difference over approximately 15 feet. That is unusual, Emma said. Is there a window open? Could air be coming in from outside? We checked. All windows were closed. The temperature gradient made no sense. We documented the phenomenon and continued our investigation. For the remainder of the night, we moved through the house methodically. We found several areas of unusual temperature distribution that had no obvious cause. We documented electromagnetic field fluctuations in the basement. We recorded audio that seemed to contain faint vocalizations, though the sounds were too indistinct to interpret as words. By 4 a.m. we returned to the base station. Marcus and David had been monitoring the feeds the entire time. We have not captured anything visually, Marcus reported, but the audio has been active consistently. And the motion sensors in the basement triggered 4 times tonight, always in the same corner of the room. No visible cause, no wind to move the sensors, they just triggered. Could be equipment malfunction, I said, though I was already documenting the anomalies mentally. We should check the sensors in the morning. Dust, age, loose batteries, any number of things could cause false triggering. We reviewed the audio recordings from the night. The sounds were subtle, mostly environmental noise, creaks and groans that old houses produce constantly. But there were moments where something seemed more structured, a pattern that suggested intentional sound rather than random noise. That could be phonetic, Emma said, pointing to a particularly clear audio spike. Like someone trying to speak but not quite managing it. Or like the house settling in a pattern that our brains interpret as speech, I countered. Pareidolia, our tendency to find patterns in random data. Right, but it is still worth documenting. We logged our findings and prepared to rest. Despite the observations, nothing we had documented was conclusively paranormal. Nothing broke the boundaries of rational explanation. Unusual, yes, but not impossible. The next day, we performed systematic checks on all equipment. The motion sensors were functioning properly. No battery issues, no loose connections, no obvious malfunction. The sensors had triggered deliberately. We spent the second night in a different configuration. I wanted to test whether the activity was responsive to our presence or independent of it. We left cameras and audio recorders running but vacated the house entirely. We sat in our equipment van in the driveway, monitoring feeds remotely. Throughout the night the activity continued exactly as it had the previous evening. Motion sensors in the basement triggered. Audio recordings picked up the same indistinct sounds. Temperature fluctuations appeared in the same locations. The activity was consistent and ongoing, regardless of whether we were present inside the house. "This is interesting," Marcus said around 3 a.m. "The activity is not responsive to us. It is not reacting to our presence. It is just happening. Like the house has its own routine," Emma added, "independent of whether anyone is here to observe it." On the morning of day 3, we received our first direct sign that something was different about this investigation. I woke in the hotel room where our team was staying and found a message on my phone. It was from Marcus. He had sent it at 3:47 a.m. The message read, "Something is wrong. Come back immediately." I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring, sounding distressed. "What happened?" I asked. "We found something," he said. "We came back to the house at midnight to swap out memory cards on the cameras. When we arrived, the front door was open. We did not leave it open. We locked it. Thomas locked it, but it was open. Could Thomas have opened it? He is not here. He said he would leave us a key and stay at his own place. He is not at the house. I was already pulling on clothes. Do not go inside until I get there." It took me 15 minutes to get to the house. Emma was already there with Marcus and David, standing in the driveway. The front door was indeed open. I could see it from the road. "Anyone inside?" I asked. "We have not checked," Marcus said. "We thought we should wait for you." I called out into the house. "Hello, Thomas? Anyone here?" Silence. I stepped inside carefully. The house was empty. Everything appeared normal except for one thing. The motion sensors we had placed in the basement had been disabled. They were still on their mounts, but the batteries had been removed. "Someone was inside," David said, stating the obvious. "Someone deliberately removed the sensors." "Why would they do that?" Emma asked. I did not have an answer. We searched the house thoroughly. Everything else was undisturbed. Nothing appeared to have been stolen or damaged. The only deliberate action was the removal of the basement sensors. I called Thomas. He answered after several rings, sounding confused. "Why would I open the door?" he said when I asked him. "I left you the key specifically so you could come and go. I did not go back to the house." "The front door was open when we arrived," I said, "and someone removed the motion sensors from the basement." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "That is odd," he said finally. "The house has done things like that before, moved things around, made changes when no one was inside. I thought maybe you would experience it directly, but I did not want to prejudice your investigation." "You should have told us that," I said. "Would you have believed me if I had?" Thomas asked. He was right. I would not have. The idea that a house was rearranging its contents while empty was something I would have dismissed as impossible. We disabled the front door sensors and physically locked it, then booby-trapped it with a piece of string at ankle height inside the room. If someone entered, we would know. We increased our presence at the house, having one team member remain inside at all times. By the fourth night, the activity had escalated. Objects were moving. We documented it carefully. A book would be on a shelf in the library, and 6 hours later it would be on a table in a different room. Water glasses that we left on the kitchen counter would be moved to different locations. Not broken, not damaged, just relocated. The audio recordings were becoming clearer. The sounds were taking on more structure. We were beginning to hear what sounded like actual words, though the context was nonsensical, and the temperature fluctuations were becoming dramatic. In one instance, the main bedroom dropped 20 degrees in the space of 5 minutes. I could see my breath. The thermometer was functioning properly. The temperature was genuinely dropping in ways that made no environmental sense. "The house is responding to us," Emma said on the fourth evening. "All of this escalation started after we arrived. It is reacting to our investigation. Or we are becoming primed to see patterns," I countered. "We are here expecting paranormal activity. We are interpreting ambiguous phenomena as evidence of that activity." "Michael, objects are moving in ways that objects do not move on their own," Marcus said. "I have been filming everything. We have documented evidence of items changing position without human intervention." "Unless someone is here," David said quietly. "Unless someone is inside the house moving things when we are not looking." The implication hung in the air. If someone was inside the house moving things, disabling equipment, deliberately manipulating our investigation, then we were not dealing with a haunting. We were dealing with someone who was deliberately creating an illusion of a haunting. "Then we stake it out," I said. We position someone inside the house. We watch continuously. If someone is here moving things, we will catch them. We set up a plan. I would remain inside the house from midnight to 6 a.m., positioned in the main parlor where I could see into the main hallway, the dining room, and the library. I would remain completely silent, no movement, just observation. If someone tried to move objects, I would see them. The night started normally. Around 1 a.m., the house settled into its usual sounds, creaks and groans, the sounds of an old structure adjusting to temperature changes. I remained motionless, watching. At approximately 2:30 a.m., I heard movement above me. Footsteps, deliberate footsteps on the second floor. I heard them move across one room and into another. I heard what sounded like furniture shifting. I remained silent. Whoever was upstairs did not know I was positioned in the parlor. I could use that advantage. After 10 minutes of movement, the sounds stopped. I waited another 30 minutes to be absolutely certain they were not returning. Then I rose slowly and began climbing the stairs. The second floor was empty. No one was there. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. No one. The house was empty except for me. But I had heard footsteps. I had heard movement. I had heard deliberate activity. I had not imagined it. I went back downstairs and sat in the parlor. My hands were shaking. At around 4 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. This time they moved through the main hallway downstairs. Slow, deliberate steps. From the front door toward the kitchen, I could hear them clearly. I stood and moved to the edge of the parlor, positioning myself so I could see into the hallway. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. But the footsteps continued. They moved past my position, into the kitchen, and then stopped. I was not imagining it. I was hearing something that was not there. "Team," I said into my radio, keeping my voice low. "I am hearing footsteps. Multiple instances of distinct footsteps while the house is empty. Location appears to be the main floor hallway and kitchen." There was a pause before Emma responded. "Michael, we are watching the live feeds from inside the house. There is no one there. The hallway is empty. Whatever you are hearing is not showing up on video." That was worse than the alternative. If someone was inside the house moving things, at least there was a rational explanation. But if I was hearing footsteps that did not appear on camera, that did not correspond to any visible presence, then something else was happening. Something that was creating sound without a source. I remained in the house until dawn. I documented everything I heard. I also began to experience something else. A sense of presence. A feeling of being watched. A growing awareness that I was not alone in that house, even though I could see clearly that I was the only person there. By the time dawn broke, I was genuinely unsettled. Not frightened exactly, but disturbed in a way that my rational framework could not accommodate. I left the house at 6 a.m. as planned. The team was waiting outside. "What happened?" Emma asked immediately. "I heard footsteps," I said. "Multiple distinct instances, no visible source. The house is empty, but something is producing the sound of footsteps. That is consistent with what we have been recording," Marcus said. "The audio has documented those same sounds, clear footstep patterns, but nothing on video." "So we have a haunted house," David said, stating it plainly. "We have documented activity that cannot be explained through conventional means. Activity that is occurring in an empty structure. Activity that produces sound but no visible source." I wanted to argue against that conclusion. I wanted to find an alternative explanation, but I was running out of alternatives. "Let's review everything we have," I said. "Every piece of data, every video, every audio file, every measurement. Let's compile it all and see what we actually have." We spent the day analyzing our evidence. What emerged was a pattern that was increasingly difficult to rationalize. The activity in the house was consistent and repeatable. It was not random. The footsteps always occurred in specific patterns. The temperature changes were localized to specific rooms. The objects that moved were always specific items, never random. And there was something else. A pattern in the audio recordings that I had not noticed initially. The indistinct vocalizations were becoming clearer. We applied audio filters, sound analysis software, everything we had in our technical toolkit. And what emerged was a structure that was almost linguistic. "Listen to this," Emma said, playing back a filtered recording. "This is from night 2. Listen to the pattern." I listened. There was a sequence of sounds. They were not quite words, but they had a rhythm that was almost language. A pattern that suggested meaning without actually conveying meaning. "Play it again," I said. She played it a second time. The same sequence, the same pattern. "It is consistent," I said. "Whatever is creating that sound is creating the same sequence repeatedly." "Like it is trying to communicate," Emma said. "Or like it is remembering a sequence," David suggested. "Like it is repeating something it has learned." We spent hours analyzing the audio. We identified 17 distinct sequences that repeated throughout our recordings. None of them corresponded to English words. None of them corresponded to any known language. But they were structured. They were intentional. They were the product of something that was trying to create patterns with sound. The conclusion we reached was uncomfortable. We were documenting something that showed signs of intelligence. Not a ghost exactly, not a spirit in the traditional sense, but something that was aware, something that was learning how to communicate with us. By evening we had made our decision. We would conduct one final investigation. We would set up audio recorders throughout the house and attempt to establish communication. We would present sounds, patterns, words, and see if the house would respond. I am mentioning the next part because it is important to understanding what happened. We recorded a series of basic sounds, single tones, patterns, simple words. We played them through speakers positioned throughout the house. We waited to see if the house would respond by creating similar patterns. The response came within minutes. The house began producing sounds that mimicked what we had played. Not perfectly, but identifiably. We played a specific tone, and within seconds the house produced a similar tone. We played a specific pattern and the house created a pattern back. It was not just responding. It was learning our patterns and repeating them back to us. It is communicating, Emma breathed. And then everything changed. The patterns the house was creating became more complex. They started incorporating elements of our recordings but also adding new components. The sounds became longer, more structured. The house was not just mimicking us. It was building on what we had provided. It was taking our communication and expanding it. We need to stop, David said suddenly. We need to stop doing this now. Why? I asked. Because we are teaching it, David said. We are teaching something in this house how to communicate. Every pattern we give it, it learns and builds on. We are accelerating its ability to interact with us. That cannot be good. I understood his point. We were not investigating a phenomenon. We were interacting with something, providing it tools to become more effective at that interaction. We were not the experts here. We were not in control of this situation. I turned off all the speakers and pulled the audio recorders offline. The sounds from the house continued for several seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, final. That is it, I said. We are done. We are leaving this house. We will compile our findings and end the investigation. No one argued with me. We packed our equipment, documented the state of the house, and prepared to leave. As we were loading the final case into our van, Thomas arrived. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "You still have 2 days on your permit." "We are done," I said. "We have documented sufficient evidence. We need to analyze and prepare our report." Thomas looked disappointed. "What did you find?" "Something we do not understand," I said. "Something that demonstrates intelligence and learning capacity. Something that responds to external input by incorporating that input into increasingly complex patterns. We documented it. We will analyze it. But we cannot continue the investigation." Thomas nodded slowly. "The house is alive," he said. It was not a question. "Something in the house is alive," I corrected. "Or aware, or conscious. We do not have language for what we found." "My mother always said that," Thomas said. "She said the house was a living thing, that it had moods and thoughts and purposes of its own." I thought she was romanticizing an old structure. "But you believe her." "I believe something is occurring in that house that cannot be explained through conventional frameworks," I said carefully. "Whether that constitutes being alive, I cannot say." We finished loading our equipment and left Harlan County that evening. The drive back took 6 hours. During that time, none of us spoke much. Everyone was processing what we had experienced in different ways. "That was real," Marcus said as we neared the state line. "Right? That actually happened. That was not equipment malfunction or false interpretation. That actually happened." "Yes," I said. "It happened." "What was it?" Emma asked. "I do not know," I said, and I think that not knowing might be the most important discovery we have ever made. Back home, we began the process of compiling our findings into a formal report. We reviewed every second of video footage. We analyzed every audio file. We compiled our measurements and observations into a comprehensive record. What we discovered was even more disturbing than what we had experienced. The house had been learning. The footsteps had become clearer and more distinct over the course of our investigation. The audio sequences had become more complex. The object movements had become more precise. The temperature fluctuations had become more dramatic. Each night the house was becoming better at manifesting, better at creating effects that we could perceive, better at demonstrating its presence to us. We did not return to the Stafford house. Our report was comprehensive and documented, but it was not conclusive. We could not state definitively what was occurring in that house. We could only present evidence of phenomena that we could not explain. The paranormal community response to our report was mixed. Some people were convinced we had found proof of genuine haunting. Others dismissed our findings as equipment malfunction or misinterpretation. A few people suggested we had committed deliberate fraud to boost our reputation. None of those responses bothered me. What bothered me was the knowledge that we had gone to that house thinking we were investigators and left realizing we were participants. We had not discovered something. We had activated something. We had taught something how to communicate more effectively. I do not know if the Stafford house is still producing activity. Thomas Stafford stopped responding to emails about 6 months after our investigation. The house was taken off the property tax rolls about a year ago. I cannot find any current information about its status. Sometimes I think about that house. I think about what it might be. Whether it is conscious. Whether it is angry. Whether it is still in that building, continuing to learn, continuing to practice the patterns of communication we inadvertently taught it. The membership archive contains all of our unedited investigation footage, raw audio files, and detailed analysis of every anomaly we documented. For anyone who wants to examine the evidence in detail, that material is available exclusively to members who want to go deeper into what we experienced. I have never conducted another paranormal investigation. Spirit Walk continues to operate, but I have stepped back from active fieldwork. I manage the team, review findings, and provide guidance, but I do not enter old houses anymore. I do not attempt to communicate with phenomena I cannot understand, because now I understand something that I did not understand before. The world contains mysteries that are better left alone. Phenomena that exist in spaces between what we can explain and what we can prove. Things that have their own awareness, their own purposes, their own intentions. And I understand that sometimes when you go looking for proof of the supernatural, you do not find evidence. You find something that was waiting, something that is eager to demonstrate that it exists. Something that becomes more present, more aware, more active, the more attention you pay to it. The Stafford house taught me that, and I will spend the rest of my life managing that knowledge.